using moral language to mask self-interest. Using moral language to mask self-interest is a manipulation tactic that wraps personal gain in the language of virtue, responsibility, or righteousness. Instead of arguing for what they want directly, someone frames their desires as ethical necessities, moral obligations, or the right thing to do. This shifts the conversation from preference to principle, making disagreement feel not just inconvenient, but wrong. This works because morality carries emotional weight. When moral language enters a discussion, logic steps aside and identity takes over. People don't want to see themselves as selfish, careless, or unethical. The brain responds defensively, prioritizing self-image over careful evaluation. Agreeing feels like alignment with values, while resisting feels like a moral failure. Emotionally, this tactic exploits guilt and fear of judgment. By positioning themselves on the moral high ground, the manipulator forces others into a losing position. Any pushback can be reframed as greed, insensitivity, or lack of integrity. The actual self-interest driving the request disappears behind words like fairness, responsibility, loyalty, or doing what's best. There is also a silencing effect. Moral language discourages questions. Challenging the request risks social consequences, shame, or exclusion. People comply not because they agree, but because they want to avoid being seen as the villain in a story they didn't choose. The emotional hook is powerful because it feels noble. People walk away believing they acted out of principle, even when the outcome benefits someone else disproportionately. Awareness matters because morality used as a shield is not ethics, it is leverage. When values are invoked to shut down dialogue rather than guide it, self-interest is usually hiding in plain sight. Withholding key information to stay indispensable. Withholding key information is a control tactic where someone deliberately keeps critical knowledge to themselves in order to remain necessary, irreplaceable, and powerful within a system. Instead of contributing openly, they ration clarity. This creates dependence. When others cannot act, decide, or succeed without a specific person's input, that person becomes the gatekeeper of progress. This works because uncertainty is emotionally uncomfortable. Humans crave predictability and direction, and when information is missing, anxiety fills the gap. The person holding the knowledge becomes a source of relief. Each time they step in to save the day, their perceived value grows, even though the crisis exists only because the information was never shared in the first place. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of looking incompetent, and fear of taking responsibility without full context. Teams begin to second-guess themselves, waiting for approval or clarification instead of acting independently. Over time, confidence erodes and initiative dies. The gatekeeper appears brilliant, not because they are creating value, but because they are preventing others from doing so. There is also a quiet power in selective transparency. By choosing when and how much to reveal, the manipulator controls timing, outcomes, and credit. Others may even defend them, believing their complexity is proof of expertise rather than obstruction. The danger of this behavior lies in how normal it can appear. It often masquerades as carefulness or professionalism, but the emotional cost is stagnation, dependency, and suppressed potential. Awareness breaks the spell because once information hoarding is seen as a tactic rather than a trait, its authority begins to collapse. Pretending incompetence. So others do the work. Pretending incompetence is a subtle psychological maneuver where someone presents themselves as less capable, less confident, or less knowledgeable than they truly are, triggering others to step in and compensate. At its core, this tactic exploits a deep emotional reflex. Most people feel discomfort when they perceive inefficiency, struggle, or failure in front of them. The urge to help is not just kindness, it is a way to restore order, competence, and control in the environment. This works because humans are wired to avoid friction. When someone appears unable to complete a task smoothly, the situation creates tension. The brain seeks relief from that tension, and the fastest solution is often to take over rather than endure the discomfort of watching someone struggle. Over time, this dynamic quietly shifts responsibility away from the person feigning incompetence and onto those around them. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on guilt, empathy, and social obligation. People fear being seen as unhelpful, cold, or unsupportive, especially in group or workplace settings. When incompetence is paired with helplessness, others may feel morally compelled to intervene, even at their own expense. This can create an unspoken hierarchy where one person consistently carries less burden while benefiting from the effort of others. The danger lies in how invisible this pattern can be. Because the behavior appears passive rather than aggressive, it often escapes scrutiny. Over time, resentment builds in those doing the extra work, while the person exploiting the dynamic reinforces their comfort and advantage. Awareness matters because once this pattern is recognized, the emotional trigger loses its power, and responsibility can be redistributed consciously rather than emotionally. Exploiting politeness to cross boundaries. Exploiting politeness to cross boundaries is a manipulation tactic that turns social grace into a weapon. It relies on the unspoken rules that govern good behavior and uses them to bypass resistance without ever asking for consent directly. Instead of force, it uses discomfort. Instead of confrontation, it uses expectation. The target feels pressure not because they want to agree, but because they fear the social cost of saying no. This works because politeness is deeply emotional. From a young age, people are conditioned to be agreeable, accommodating, and non-confrontational. Saying no can feel rude, selfish, or embarrassing, even when it is justified. Manipulators exploit this conditioning by making requests that are technically optional but emotionally loaded. The moment refusal feels awkward, the boundary is already under attack. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on guilt and fear of judgment. The person being pressured imagines how they will be perceived if they resist. They worry about being labeled difficult, unkind, or unreasonable. That imagined social punishment often feels more threatening than the actual boundary violation, so they comply to restore emotional safety. This behavior often escalates gradually. Small intrusions test tolerance, and when they go unchallenged, larger ones follow. Because each step appears minor, the target may not realize how far their boundaries have shifted until discomfort becomes constant. Meanwhile, the manipulator frames their behavior as normal, friendly, or harmless. The danger lies in how invisible this tactic can be. It hides behind smiles, favors, and just asking. Awareness breaks its power. When politeness is recognized as a lever rather than a virtue, people can choose respect over reflex and reclaim boundaries without apology. Gaslighting to make others doubt their memory. Gaslighting is a psychological manipulation tactic designed to destabilize someone's sense of reality by causing them to question their own memory, perception, or judgment. Rather than openly denying facts, the manipulator subtly rewrites them. Conversations are reframed, past events are minimized or altered, and certainty is replaced with confusion. The goal is not to win an argument, but to erode confidence over time. This works because memory is deeply tied to identity. When someone begins to doubt what they remember, they begin to doubt themselves. The emotional discomfort of uncertainty is intense, and the brain naturally looks for an external anchor. The gaslighter positions themselves as that anchor, presenting calm certainty while the other person feels increasingly unstable. Emotionally, this tactic exploits trust. It works best in close relationships, workplaces, or hierarchies where one person's word already carries weight. When someone you trust insists that never happened or you're remembering it wrong, the mind hesitates. The fear of being mistaken, dramatic, or irrational overrides the instinct to defend one's own experience. Over time, the emotional impact compounds. The person being gaslit may start seeking permission to feel, think, or decide. They replay conversations obsessively, searching for clarity that never arrives. Confidence fades, dependence grows, and the manipulator gains quiet control without ever raising their voice. What makes gaslighting especially dangerous is its invisibility. It rarely looks like abuse in the moment. It looks like misunderstanding, forgetfulness, or disagreement. Awareness is crucial because once someone recognizes the pattern, the spell weakens. Reality becomes something you can verify, not something that can be taken from you. Using urgency to force rushed decisions. Using urgency to force rushed decisions is a psychological pressure tactic that hijacks the brain's fear response and replaces careful thinking with survival instinct. It relies on the idea that when time feels scarce, judgment collapses. The moment someone believes they are running out of time, their focus narrows, logic weakens, and emotional decision-making takes over. This works because urgency triggers stress. Stress tells the brain that danger is near, even when none exists. In that state, people prioritize speed over accuracy and relief over outcomes. The desire to escape pressure becomes stronger than the desire to choose wisely. When someone says, "This needs to be decided now," or "This opportunity won't last," they are not offering information, they are creating panic. Emotionally, this tactic exploits loss aversion. Humans are far more motivated by the fear of losing something than by the possibility of gaining something better later. Urgency reframes hesitation as loss. Waiting feels irresponsible. Cautious thinking feels risky, and compliance feels like safety. The person applying pressure positions themselves as the solution to the anxiety they created. As urgency intensifies, people stop asking questions. Red flags blur. Boundaries soften. Doubt is interpreted as weakness. Even intelligent, experienced individuals can be pulled into decisions they would never make under calm conditions. The emotional hook is powerful because it feels internal, as if the need to act is coming from within rather than being imposed from outside. The manipulation deepens when urgency is paired with authority or confidence. The brain assumes that if someone is pushing so hard, they must know something you don't. Awareness is critical because real opportunities withstand scrutiny, while manufactured urgency collapses the moment you slow the clock. Taking credit for group contributions. Taking credit for group contributions is a social manipulation tactic where one individual positions themselves as the primary driver of success while quietly minimizing or erasing the efforts of others. It thrives in environments where recognition is scarce and visibility equals power. At an emotional level, this hack exploits the human tendency to simplify stories. People prefer clear heroes over complex collaborations, and manipulators step neatly into that role. This works because attention is a limited resource. In meetings, presentations, or social settings, the person who speaks last, speaks loudest, or frames the narrative most confidently often becomes the one remembered. When someone confidently recounts outcomes using "I" instead of "we," the brain subconsciously assigns ownership. Confidence acts as a shortcut for credibility, even when it is undeserved. Emotionally, this tactic preys on hesitation and politeness. Many contributors stay silent to avoid conflict, fearing they will appear petty, insecure, or confrontational if they correct the narrative. that silence becomes permission. Over time, the credit taker's version of events solidifies into accepted truth, while the real contributors feel unseen and slowly disengage. There is also a deeper psychological hook at play: authority bias. When someone is perceived as competent or charismatic, others assume their claims are accurate. The group begins to doubt its own memory, wondering if the credit taker really did more than they recall. This creates confusion and self-doubt, which further protects the manipulator. The emotional damage accumulates quietly. Motivation erodes, trust fractures, and resentment grows beneath the surface. Recognizing this behavior early is critical, because once narratives harden, reclaiming credit feels less like truth-telling and more like rebellion. Name-dropping to imply authority or access. Name-dropping to imply authority or access is a social influence tactic where someone references powerful, respected, or high-status individuals to borrow credibility they may not actually possess. The names act as shortcuts. Instead of proving competence, trustworthiness, or legitimacy through action, the person lets association do the emotional labor for them. The listener fills in the gaps automatically. This works because the human brain is deeply responsive to status cues. When a familiar or prestigious name appears, authority bias activates. People assume proximity equals approval, access equals importance, and familiarity equals trust. The emotional reaction happens before logic has a chance to intervene. Doubt softens, skepticism quiets, and questions feel inappropriate. Emotionally, this tactic preys on insecurity and social comparison. Hearing names linked to success can make people feel smaller, less informed, or behind. In that moment, challenging the speaker feels risky, as if questioning them also means questioning the authority of the person being referenced. Silence becomes self-protection. Name-dropping also creates an illusion of insider status. Humans are drawn to perceived access because it promises safety, opportunity, and belonging. If someone sounds connected, others fear missing out by distancing themselves. The manipulator becomes a bridge to something desirable, even if the bridge leads nowhere. The danger lies in how easily memory distorts reality. Over time, listeners may forget the details and retain only the emotional residue. This person seemed important. Awareness breaks the spell. When names replace substance, influence is being manufactured, not earned, and authority exists only as long as it goes unquestioned. Playing the victim to dodge accountability. Playing the victim to dodge accountability is a manipulation tactic where responsibility is quietly redirected through emotional inversion. Instead of addressing harm caused, the individual reframes themselves as the one who has been hurt, misunderstood, or unfairly targeted. This shift instantly changes the emotional gravity of the situation. Attention moves away from actions and toward feelings, away from consequences and toward comfort. This works because humans are deeply conditioned to protect the vulnerable. When someone appears wounded, distressed, or overwhelmed, the instinct to criticize shuts down. Accountability begins to feel cruel. The brain associates confrontation with harm and harm with moral failure. As a result, people soften their stance, lower expectations, or abandon the issue altogether to avoid feeling like the aggressor. Emotionally, this tactic exploits empathy and guilt. Those seeking accountability begin to question themselves. They worry they were too harsh, too insensitive, too demanding. The original issue becomes blurred as the emotional spotlight stays fixed on the supposed suffering of the person being confronted. Over time, this creates a pattern where harm goes unaddressed because addressing it feels emotionally unsafe. There is also a power reversal at play. By becoming the victim, the manipulator gains moral leverage. Any further questioning can be reframed as persecution. Boundaries are portrayed as attacks. Consequences are cast as cruelty. This traps others in a double bind where speaking up makes them feel heartless and staying silent feels wrong. The emotional toll accumulates quietly. Accountability erodes, resentment grows, and unhealthy dynamics solidify. Recognizing this behavior matters because genuine vulnerability invites resolution, while performative victimhood exists solely to escape responsibility and retain control. Strategic lateness to appear important. Strategic lateness is a social signaling tactic where someone deliberately arrives late to suggest that their time is more valuable than everyone else's. It reframes disrespect as status. By violating expectations without immediate consequence, the person subtly communicates power, demand, and perceived importance, forcing others to adapt around them. This works because time is emotionally tied to value. When someone keeps others waiting, it creates an imbalance. The waiting party unconsciously assigns higher status to the absent person, assuming they must be busy with something more critical. Scarcity amplifies worth, and lateness creates artificial scarcity of access. The longer the wait, the more significance the arrival seems to carry. Emotionally, this tactic exploits social conditioning around hierarchy. People are trained to tolerate delays from authority figures while feeling guilty for causing delays themselves. That discomfort turns into rationalization. Instead of questioning the behavior, people justify it by elevating the late person's importance. This protects social harmony while quietly reinforcing the manipulator's position. There is also a control element at play. Strategic lateness disrupts momentum and places the late individual at the center of attention upon arrival. Conversations pause, energy resets, and focus shifts toward them. They re-enter as the implicit priority, often steering the direction of discussion without having earned it. Over time, this behavior trains others to accommodate and adjust expectations downward. Meetings start later. Deadlines flex. Accountability weakens. The emotional cost is subtle resentment mixed with compliance. Awareness breaks the illusion because true importance does not require disruption. When lateness becomes a pattern rather than an exception, it stops signaling value and starts revealing manipulation. Selective honesty that hides crucial context. Selective honesty is a manipulation tactic where someone tells the truth, but only the parts that benefit them, carefully omitting information that would change how that truth is understood. On the surface, it feels clean and ethical. Nothing said is technically false, yet the reality being presented is incomplete in a way that quietly distorts perception and decision-making. This works because humans are wired to trust truth-tellers. When someone appears transparent, the brain relaxes, skepticism drops. We stop probing. Selective honesty exploits that trust by feeding the mind just enough accuracy to shut down deeper questioning. The listener assumes that if the visible facts are real, the invisible ones must not matter. Emotionally, this tactic preys on certainty. People crave clarity, especially in complex situations. When someone offers a confident, coherent version of events, it feels stabilizing. Doubt fades, even though the missing context may completely reverse the meaning of what's being shared. The emotional comfort of knowing overrides the discomfort of uncertainty. This is especially powerful in relationships, leadership, and persuasion. By controlling context, the manipulator controls interpretation. Others may defend them fiercely, believing they were honest while still being misled. When the full picture eventually surfaces, the emotional damage is deeper because trust was never broken by a lie, but by a revelation. The most unsettling part is how hard this is to detect. The listener often blames themselves for not asking the right questions. Awareness matters because truth without context is not clarity, it's choreography, guiding emotions and conclusions while preserving plausible innocence. Overloading others with complexity to discourage scrutiny. Overloading others with complexity is a manipulation tactic that uses confusion as a shield. Instead of hiding information, it floods the space with it. Excessive jargon, layered explanations, dense details, and unnecessary nuance are deployed not to clarify, but to exhaust. When people feel mentally overwhelmed, their instinct is not to challenge, but to retreat. This works because cognitive energy is limited. The human brain avoids effort when the cost feels too high. When faced with something that feels too complex to untangle, people default to trust, deference, or disengagement. Scrutiny requires focus, confidence, and stamina. Complexity quietly drains all three. Emotionally, this tactic exploits intimidation and self-doubt. Many people fear looking unintelligent more than being misled. When explanations sound sophisticated, listeners assume the problem is their own lack of understanding rather than the speaker's lack of clarity. The manipulator benefits from this silence, as confusion is mistaken for depth. There is also an authority illusion embedded in complexity. People associate difficulty with expertise. If something is hard to understand, it must be advanced. If someone speaks in a way that feels inaccessible, they must be smarter. This emotional shortcut discourages follow-up questions because questioning feels like exposing ignorance. Over time, this dynamic creates learned helplessness. People stop engaging altogether, accepting conclusions without comprehension. Decisions pass without resistance. Accountability fades behind layers of explanation. The true danger is that complexity feels neutral, even professional, while functioning as a barrier to truth. Awareness weakens the tactic instantly. Genuine expertise simplifies. Manipulation obscures. When clarity is avoided instead of pursued, complexity is no longer information. It is control. Asking for small favors to escalate compliance. Asking for small favors to escalate compliance is a psychological technique that begins innocently and quietly grows into control. It starts with something so minor, it barely registers as a request at all. A quick favor, a harmless yes, a moment of cooperation. Once that first agreement is made, something subtle shifts internally. The person who said yes begins to see themselves as helpful, agreeable, and aligned with the requester. This works because humans have a powerful need for internal consistency. After agreeing once, the brain feels pressure to behave in ways that match that initial choice. Saying no later creates emotional friction, a sense of contradiction that feels uncomfortable. Each additional request becomes easier to accept, not because it is reasonable, but because refusal now feels like breaking character. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on identity. People don't want to feel selfish, difficult, or unreliable. When a manipulator frames small favors as trust, cooperation, or loyalty, declining starts to feel like a moral failure rather than a personal boundary. The requests grow slowly, almost invisibly, until the person realizes they are doing far more than they ever intended. The danger lies in how natural it feels. There is no moment where manipulation is obvious. Each step seems logical when viewed alone. The emotional hook is the fear of disappointing someone or contradicting your past self. Over time, autonomy erodes, replaced by obligation that feels self-chosen rather than imposed. Awareness matters because once you see the pattern, the spell weakens. A small yes is never just a small yes when it is being used to rewrite your future no. Framing choices to make one option feel inevitable. Framing choices to make one option feel inevitable is a persuasion tactic that gives the illusion of freedom while quietly steering the outcome. Instead of forcing a decision, it narrows the mental landscape so thoroughly that alternatives stop feeling real. The person believes they are choosing, when in reality, the path has already been laid beneath their feet. This works because the brain relies heavily on framing to evaluate options. How a choice is presented determines how it feels. When one option is framed as normal, safe, responsible, or expected, and the others are framed as risky, inconvenient, or socially awkward, the emotional weight shifts. The inevitable choice begins to feel like common sense rather than influence. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear and belonging. People want to avoid regret, embarrassment, and isolation. When a choice is framed as what most people do or what a reasonable person would choose, rejecting it feels like stepping outside the group. The discomfort of standing alone can outweigh personal judgment, pulling the person toward compliance. The power of this tactic grows when time, authority, or stakes are involved. Once doubt is framed as irresponsibility, questioning feels dangerous. The mind stops exploring and starts justifying. What feels like clarity is often simply constraint disguised as certainty. The manipulation is subtle because no option is explicitly removed. All choices technically remain available, but only one feels emotionally viable. Awareness restores balance. When inevitability is sensed, it's often a signal to slow down and re-examine what has been emotionally weighted and what has been quietly minimized. Feigning agreement while planning otherwise. Feigning agreement while planning otherwise is a deceptive social tactic where someone signals alignment, consent, or support on the surface while privately intending to act in contradiction to what was agreed. It creates a false sense of harmony that lowers defenses and delays resistance. The power of this tactic lies not in what is said, but in the emotional safety it manufactures. This works because agreement is soothing. When people hear affirmation, their nervous system relaxes. Conflict dissolves, vigilance drops, and the brain stops scanning for threat. Apparent agreement tells others that the issue is settled, that energy no longer needs to be spent monitoring behavior or enforcing boundaries. That moment of relief is exactly where leverage is gained. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on trust and the human desire for stability. People want to believe alignment is real because disagreement is exhausting. When someone nods, affirms, or reassures, it feels like resolution. That emotional closure makes people less likely to document, follow up, or verify actions later. The manipulation deepens because confrontation is postponed. By the time the contradiction becomes visible, the emotional cost of revisiting the issue feels higher than letting it slide. The manipulator relies on inertia and social discomfort to carry them forward. Others may even question their own memory, wondering if the agreement was ever explicit. This tactic is especially effective in hierarchies or relationships where harmony is valued over accountability. The person feigning agreement avoids immediate friction while preserving their own agenda. Awareness matters because once agreement is recognized as performative rather than genuine, words lose their power and behavior becomes the only signal worth trusting. Using social proof that isn't representative. Using social proof that isn't representative is a manipulation tactic where selective examples are presented as if they reflect the majority, creating a false sense of consensus. Instead of showing what is common or typical, the manipulator highlights a carefully chosen minority and frames it as normal, expected, or universally accepted. The power of this tactic lies in its ability to make people doubt their own instincts in favor of perceived group behavior. This works because humans are deeply social decision makers. The brain constantly scans for cues about what others are doing to determine what is safe, smart, or acceptable. When people believe everyone else is on board, resistance feels risky and isolation feels threatening. Even subtle claims like "most people agree" or "this is what successful people do" can override personal judgment. Emotionally, This tactic exploits the fear of being left out or seen as wrong. No one wants to be the only one pushing back while everyone else seems confident and aligned. The discomfort of standing alone often outweighs the discomfort of accepting something that doesn't fully feel right. As a result, people comply not because they are convinced, but because they want to belong. The manipulation deepens when the examples used are aspirational rather than accurate. Highlighting high-status individuals, extreme success stories, or curated testimonials creates an illusion that a path is proven, even when it isn't realistic or widespread. The brain confuses visibility with frequency and confidence with truth. Over time, this erodes independent thinking. Decisions are made based on perceived momentum rather than evidence. Awareness matters because real social proof holds up under scrutiny, while manufactured consensus collapses the moment you ask who is missing from the picture and why. Leveraging confidential info without attribution. Leveraging confidential information without attribution is a manipulation tactic where someone quietly uses privileged or private knowledge to gain status, influence, or advantage while hiding the source of that information. The power of this hack comes from asymmetry. One person knows something others don't, and instead of protecting it or crediting its origin, they reshape it into leverage. This works because information signals power. When someone appears unusually informed, people assume competence, access, and authority. The brain fills in the gaps, believing this person must be well-connected or highly trusted. The real source disappears, and the listener focuses on the confidence of delivery rather than the ethics of how the knowledge was obtained. Emotionally, this tactic exploits trust twice. First, it violates the trust of the person who shared the information in confidence. Second, it manipulates the audience, who are unknowingly reacting to stolen credibility. The speaker gains influence without accountability, able to guide decisions, shape narratives, or undermine others while remaining insulated from consequences. There is also a fear-based hook at play. Confidential information often carries emotional weight, secrets, vulnerabilities, or risks. When revealed indirectly, it creates tension and curiosity without triggering obvious alarms. People lean in, believing they are receiving insight rather than being subtly influenced. Over time, this behavior distorts environments. Trust erodes quietly as people sense something is off but can't identify why. The manipulator thrives in the shadows of plausibility, never lying outright, never revealing sources, always appearing informed. Awareness is critical because once you recognize how information is being used without ownership, the illusion of authority collapses and the emotional grip loosens. Creating artificial scarcity. Creating artificial scarcity is a manipulation tactic that manufactures the feeling that something is rare, fleeting, or about to disappear in order to amplify desire and suppress rational thought. When availability is threatened, value feels heightened, even if nothing about the thing itself has changed. The perception of loss becomes more powerful than the reality of gain. This works because scarcity triggers a primal fear response. The brain interprets limited access as danger, as if missing out could threaten status, security, or belonging. In that state, people stop evaluating quality and start reacting emotionally. The thought shifts from, "Is this right for me?" to, "What happens if I lose this?" That emotional shift is where control is gained. Emotionally, scarcity exploits urgency, competition, and self-worth. When people believe others might get something they don't, comparison ignites. Desire becomes entangled with identity. Owning, securing, or agreeing feels like proof of worth or intelligence, while hesitation feels like failure. The fear of regret becomes louder than reason. Artificial scarcity often hides behind phrases that sound informative but are emotionally loaded. Limited time, limited spots, exclusive access, or vague warnings about availability create pressure without evidence. The uncertainty itself is the hook. The brain fills in the gaps with worst-case scenarios, pushing action forward. The most dangerous part is how scarcity narrows perception. Alternatives fade. Red flags soften. The emotional relief of locking it in overrides careful consideration. Awareness is critical because real value does not need to rush you. When something demands panic to be chosen, the scarcity may be the product, not the condition. Weaponizing just joking to test boundaries. Weaponizing just joking is a social manipulation tactic where humor is used as camouflage for disrespect, control, or aggression. The joke is not the point. The reaction is. By delivering a comment that lightly crosses a boundary and immediately retreating behind humor, the person gains valuable information about what they can get away with. This works because humor disarms. Laughter lowers defenses, softens judgment, and reframes harm as harmless. When something uncomfortable is wrapped in a joke, the brain struggles to categorize it as a threat. If the target reacts negatively, the speaker can deny intent. If the target stays silent or laughs along, the boundary quietly moves. Emotionally, this tactic exploits the fear of social disruption. Many people are conditioned to prioritize harmony over discomfort. Calling out a joke feels risky. It can make someone appear sensitive, humorless, or confrontational. The manipulator relies on this hesitation, knowing most people will absorb the discomfort rather than challenge the framing. The real power lies in plausible deniability. "I was just joking" reframes the issue as a misunderstanding rather than a violation. The emotional burden shifts to the target, who is now pressured to question their own reaction instead of the behavior itself. Over time, repeated jokes normalize disrespect, making escalation feel gradual and almost invisible. This tactic also functions as a calibration tool. Each joke gathers data: who pushes back, who laughs, who freezes, who stays quiet. The manipulator adjusts accordingly, tightening control where resistance is weakest. Awareness is critical because humor should create connection, not confusion. When jokes consistently leave someone feeling smaller, uncertain, or on edge, they are no longer jokes. They are probes. Deliberate ambiguity to deny responsibility. Later. Deliberate ambiguity is a manipulation tactic where someone intentionally keeps their words, commitments, or intentions vague so they can reinterpret them when outcomes are known. Instead of stating clear positions, they speak in half-promises, flexible language, and undefined expectations. This creates a future escape route. No matter what happens, they can claim alignment, misunderstanding, or innocence. This works because clarity creates accountability, and accountability creates risk. By avoiding specifics, the manipulator protects themselves from consequences while still gaining the benefits of appearing involved or supportive. Others fill in the gaps with their own assumptions, often projecting optimism or agreement where none was explicitly given. When things go well, the ambiguous party steps forward. When things go wrong, they step back. Emotionally, this tactic exploits trust and optimism. People want to believe they are understood and supported, so they interpret vague language in the most favorable way. The emotional investment becomes real, even though the commitment never was. Later, when responsibility is questioned, doubt replaces certainty. The victim wonders if they misheard, misunderstood, or expected too much. Ambiguity also creates power through confusion. When nothing is clearly defined, memory becomes subjective and disputes become exhausting. The manipulator appears reasonable, calm, and flexible, while others look reactive or demanding for insisting on clarity after the fact. The emotional damage accumulates quietly, frustration builds, confidence erodes, and trust thins. Awareness is critical because clarity protects everyone. When someone consistently avoids being specific, it is not openness, it is insulation. Taking advantage of sunk cost thinking. Taking advantage of sunk cost thinking is a psychological manipulation that traps people in past decisions by tying their identity and emotions to what they have already invested. Time, money, effort, reputation, or emotional energy become invisible chains. Instead of evaluating a situation based on what it will cost moving forward, the mind becomes fixated on what would be wasted by walking away. This works because humans experience loss more intensely than relief. Letting go doesn't feel neutral. It feels like admitting failure, foolishness, or weakness. The brain reframes persistence as strength and quitting as defeat, even when continuing causes more damage. Manipulators lean into this discomfort, subtly reminding others of how much they've already put in, how far they've come, how close they are to a payoff that may never arrive. Emotionally, this tactic exploits pride and self-image. People don't want to feel played, so they double down. They tell themselves the pain has meaning, that endurance will justify the sacrifice. Each additional investment deepens the trap because stopping now would force them to confront the truth that earlier choices were mistakes. The emotional hook is powerful because it feels self-imposed. No one is forcing the decision in the present. The pressure comes from the past. This creates a quiet paralysis where people stay in bad jobs, toxic relationships, failing projects, or unfair arrangements long after they should have left. Awareness matters because the moment future costs are separated from past investments, the emotional fog lifts and real choice returns. Misrepresenting consensus. Everyone agrees. Misrepresenting consensus is a social pressure tactic that creates the illusion of widespread agreement to silence doubt and accelerate compliance. By claiming that everyone agrees, most people think this, or this is already decided, the manipulator reframes an opinion as a fact and disagreement as deviance. The target is no longer evaluating an idea. They are evaluating whether they want to stand alone. This works because humans are deeply wired for social belonging. Our brains treat isolation as danger. When consensus is implied, the emotional cost of dissent spikes instantly. Questioning no longer feels like curiosity, it feels like conflict. The fear is subtle but powerful. If everyone agrees, what does it say about you if you don't? Emotionally, this tactic exploits conformity and self-doubt. People begin to assume they must be missing something. Their internal voice softens while the external claim grows louder. Even when no evidence is offered, repetition and confidence make the false consensus feel real. Silence from others is interpreted as agreement, even when it is simply discomfort or disengagement. The manipulation deepens in group settings. No one wants to be the first to challenge the narrative, so hesitation spreads quietly while the illusion strengthens. Over time, the fabricated consensus becomes self-reinforcing, not because it is true, but because it is unchallenged. The danger lies in how clean this tactic sounds. It wears the language of unity and reason while bypassing discussion entirely. Awareness restores agency. When consensus is asserted without proof, it is often not consensus at all, but control disguised as agreement. Shifting blame subtly over time. Shifting blame subtly over time is a slow psychological erosion tactic that rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive as a denial or an accusation. It unfolds quietly, through tone, implication, and repetition, until responsibility no longer sits where it began. The goal is not to escape blame in one moment, but to redistribute it so gradually that no one notices the transfer. This works because memory is malleable. Humans reconstruct past events based on repetition and framing, not perfect recall. when someone repeatedly introduces small reframes like, "The situation was already messy," or "We were all unclear back then," the emotional weight of responsibility begins to diffuse. Blame stops feeling personal and starts feeling collective, abstract, or inevitable. Emotionally, this tactic exploits confusion and fatigue. Correcting the narrative once feels manageable. Correcting it repeatedly feels exhausting. Over time, people choose peace over precision. They stop pushing back, allowing the revised story to settle, simply because resisting it costs too much energy. There is also a moral discomfort at play. Being blamed outright feels unfair and triggers defense. Being gently included in shared fault feels reasonable, even mature. The manipulator uses this instinct, slowly blending their choices into the group's identity until accountability loses its edges. As the narrative shifts, the original cause fades. Consequences feel misdirected. Those affected may even begin to internalize fault that was never theirs, questioning their own judgment and role. The danger is that this tactic feels cooperative rather than hostile. It sounds balanced. It feels calm. But over time, clarity dissolves and responsibility becomes a fog where no one is quite accountable, except the ones who stayed silent longest. Exploiting power imbalances. Exploiting power imbalances is a manipulation tactic where someone leverages their higher status, authority, access, or security to extract compliance, silence, or advantage from someone with fewer options. The imbalance may be formal, like a boss and employee, or informal, like financial stability, social influence, or insider knowledge. The power itself isn't the weapon. The threat of losing safety, approval, or opportunity is. This works because power alters emotional risk. When one person has more to lose, their nervous system is already compromised. Saying no feels dangerous. Questioning feels reckless. Even mild pressure can feel overwhelming when the consequences are asymmetric. The person with power doesn't need to be aggressive. The imbalance does the work for them. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on fear and dependency. The less powerful person may comply not because they agree, but because resistance feels like self-sabotage. Over time, this creates learned helplessness. The individual adapts by shrinking expectations, tolerating discomfort, and rationalizing unfair treatment as normal or deserved. What makes this manipulation especially insidious is its deniability. The person in power can frame their actions as standard procedure, tough love, or merit-based decisions. Any pushback is labeled as oversensitivity or entitlement. The emotional experience of pressure is invalidated, even though it is real. As the imbalance is repeatedly exploited, trust erodes and self-worth deteriorates. Silence replaces honesty. Survival replaces agency. Recognizing this dynamic matters because power that cannot withstand consent is not leadership. It is coercion disguised as normalcy. Performing busyness to avoid extra work. Performing busyness is a social camouflage tactic where someone creates the appearance of constant workload to deflect responsibility, requests, and accountability. The goal is not productivity, but perception. When someone looks overwhelmed, rushed, or perpetually occupied, others hesitate to add to their plate. The illusion of effort becomes a shield. This works because people are deeply sensitive to social friction. Most individuals avoid being the cause of someone else's stress. When busyness is on display, asking for help feels intrusive, selfish, or inconsiderate. The brain reads visible strain as a signal to back off, even if the strain is manufactured. Emotionally, this tactic exploits empathy and guilt. People don't want to feel like they are piling on or exploiting someone. The performer subtly broadcasts exhaustion, urgency, and pressure, triggering protective instincts in others. Over time, tasks get redirected toward those who appear more available, even if that availability comes at their own expense. There's also a status component. In many environments, busyness is equated with importance. Someone who is always swamped is assumed to be valuable, needed, and high impact. This discourages scrutiny. No one questions output when effort is constantly signaled. The performance replaces results. The danger lies in how normalized this behavior is. It often looks like dedication rather than avoidance. But emotionally, it creates imbalance. The workload shifts silently, resentment builds, and inefficiency spreads. Awareness breaks the pattern, because once busyness is recognized as a signal rather than proof, its power to deflect responsibility fades. Selective rule enforcement. Selective rule enforcement is a power tactic where rules are applied inconsistently to shape behavior, reward loyalty, and punish resistance without ever appearing overtly unfair. On paper, the rules remain the same for everyone. In reality, they are activated or ignored depending on who is involved and what outcome is desired. This creates a system where uncertainty replaces fairness and control replaces transparency. This works because humans rely on rules for psychological safety. Rules create predictability, and predictability creates trust. When enforcement becomes inconsistent, people stop relying on the rules themselves and start relying on the person who controls them. Authority shifts from the system to the enforcer. The emotional message becomes clear. Outcomes depend on favor, not principle. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear and dependency. People begin to monitor themselves constantly, unsure of where the real boundaries lie. They may overcompensate with compliance, people-pleasing, or silence to avoid becoming the next target. Others may be granted exceptions and privileges, reinforcing loyalty and creating division within the group. The power of selective enforcement lies in plausible deniability. Because the rule technically exists, punishment can be framed as justified, while leniency can be framed as generosity. Those affected may doubt their own perception, wondering if they truly crossed a line or if they are simply being treated unfairly. That confusion keeps resistance fragmented. Over time, this erodes trust and autonomy. People stop asking what is right and start asking who is safe. Awareness is critical because once inconsistency is recognized as a strategy rather than randomness, the emotional grip weakens and patterns of control become visible. Using flattery to lower skepticism. Using flattery to lower skepticism is a manipulation tactic that bypasses logic by appealing directly to identity. Instead of challenging your ideas, it validates your self-image. Compliments are placed strategically, not to appreciate, but to disarm. When someone praises your intelligence, taste, competence, or uniqueness, your guard doesn't just drop. It feels rude to keep it up. This works because flattery activates emotional reward systems in the brain. Being seen and admired releases dopamine, which creates warmth, trust, and openness. In that state, skepticism feels unnecessary, even hostile. The mind subtly shifts from evaluation to preservation. You begin protecting the positive image being reflected back at you instead of questioning the person reflecting it. Emotionally, this tactic exploits the human hunger for validation. Most people walk around under-acknowledged. When someone offers targeted praise that feels personal, it creates instant rapport and a sense of alignment. Challenging that person now risks disrupting the emotional payoff. Doubt becomes self-sabotage. Flattery also creates an unspoken contract. Once praised, people feel pressure to reciprocate with agreement, openness, or leniency. Saying no feels inconsistent with the version of yourself that was just affirmed. The manipulator benefits from this internal tension, knowing compliance is easier than contradiction. The danger is how invisible the shift feels. People don't realize their standards have changed. Questions go unasked. Red flags feel less urgent. Decisions feel right without being examined. Awareness restores balance. Genuine respect withstands scrutiny. Strategic flattery seeks to remove it because admiration is far more effective when it replaces thinking rather than accompanies it. Moving goalposts, mid-evaluation. Moving goalposts. Mid-evaluation is a manipulation tactic where the standards for success are quietly changed after effort has already been invested. What was once considered sufficient suddenly becomes inadequate, and expectations shift without acknowledgement. This tactic destabilizes people by making achievement feel perpetually out of reach, no matter how much they deliver. This works because humans are motivated by fairness and closure. When someone agrees to rules, metrics, or expectations, the brain locks onto them as a contract. Changing those terms triggers confusion rather than immediate resistance. People assume they misunderstood, missed something, or failed to anticipate a requirement. Instead of questioning the system, they question themselves. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on hope and sunk cost. Once time, energy, or identity has been invested, walking away feels like loss. The manipulator exploits this by raising the bar just enough to keep the other person striving. Each adjustment is framed as reasonable, even necessary, while the emotional toll quietly grows. Effort increases, confidence decreases, and validation is always just one step away. Power deepens through exhaustion. When people are constantly recalibrating to meet new expectations, they lose the energy to challenge the legitimacy of the process. The manipulator maintains control by appearing demanding yet fair, while the target feels perpetually behind despite consistent performance. The emotional impact compounds over time. Motivation turns into anxiety, pride turns into self-doubt, and progress feels invisible. Recognizing this pattern matters because genuine evaluation is consistent. When standards only change after success is near, the system isn't measuring performance, it's manufacturing dependence. Exploiting fatigue in negotiations. Exploiting fatigue in negotiations is a pressure tactic that targets the mind when it is most vulnerable. As mental and emotional energy drain, resistance weakens. Decision-making becomes reactive instead of deliberate. The goal is not to persuade through logic, but to outlast. When someone is tired enough, agreement begins to feel like relief. This works because fatigue narrows cognitive capacity. The brain shifts into energy-saving mode, prioritizing the fastest path to closure. Complex evaluation feels exhausting. Objections feel heavy, and pushing back feels like work. In this state, people are more likely to accept unfavorable terms simply to end the interaction. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on depletion. Long meetings, extended discussions, late hours, or repeated revisiting of the same points slowly wear down confidence. As fatigue grows, people doubt themselves more and question their own resistance. The manipulator appears patient and steady, while the other party feels drained and off balance. There is a powerful emotional hook in the promise of rest. Agreement becomes associated with peace, quiet, and escape. Saying yes feels like reclaiming control over one's time and energy, even if the outcome is harmful. This is especially effective when fatigue is paired with subtle reassurance, making compromise feel safe rather than coerced. The danger of this tactic is how invisible it feels in the moment. Exhaustion blurs awareness. By the time clarity returns, the decision has already been made. Recognizing fatigue as a factor restores power, because decisions made in exhaustion are rarely aligned with true intent or best interest. Strategic silence to let others self-incriminate. Strategic silence is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately withholds responses, reactions, or clarification to create a psychological vacuum that pressures others to fill it. Silence feels neutral, but emotionally, it is anything but. When one person goes quiet at the right moment, the burden of the conversation shifts entirely onto the other person, who begins to speak not to communicate, but to relieve discomfort. This works because humans are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty. Silence triggers anxiety, especially in moments of tension, authority imbalance, or perceived evaluation. The brain interprets the lack of response as judgment or disapproval and rushes to resolve it. People start explaining, justifying, elaborating, often saying far more than they intended. In trying to regain emotional balance, they expose weaknesses, contradictions, or admissions that silence alone could never extract. Emotionally, this tactic exploits the fear of being misunderstood or negatively evaluated. The quiet person appears calm and in control, while the speaker feels exposed and unstable. Each additional word feels like a step towards safety, even as it digs a deeper hole. The silence acts like a mirror, reflecting insecurity back at the speaker and amplifying it. Strategic silence is especially powerful when combined with authority or confidence. A pause from someone perceived as powerful feels heavier, more meaningful. The speaker assumes the silence contains insight they lack and tries to supply missing information to match it. The manipulation hides behind passivity. Nothing is said, nothing is done, yet control is exercised. Silence becomes a tool not of listening, but of extraction, pulling truth, fear, or confession from those desperate to escape the weight of the quiet. Playing mediator to control outcomes. Playing mediator to control outcomes is a subtle power tactic where someone positions themselves as the neutral bridge between opposing sides, while quietly shaping the resolution to serve their own interests. On the surface, it appears helpful, calm, and reasonable. Beneath that surface, it grants control over information flow, framing, and final decisions. This works because mediators are trusted by default. When conflict arises, people crave relief from tension more than they crave accuracy. Anyone who offers to restore peace is immediately seen as stabilizing and mature. That perception lowers scrutiny. The mediator gains permission to interpret, summarize, and translate perspectives, and with that comes influence. Emotionally, this tactic exploits exhaustion and fear of escalation. Conflicted parties are often too drained to fact-check how their positions are being represented. They want resolution, not precision. The mediator can soften one side, exaggerate the rigidity of the other, or selectively omit details, all while appearing fair. There is also power in sequencing. By deciding who speaks, when, and in what order, the mediator shapes momentum. Early framing anchors perception. Late information feels disruptive. The mediator subtly defines what is reasonable, what is extreme, and what compromise should look like. Because neutrality is assumed, challenges feel inappropriate. Questioning the mediator feels like prolonging conflict or rejecting peace. This emotional pressure keeps others compliant even when outcomes feel off. The danger lies in invisible authorship. When decisions feel collective but were guided, accountability blurs. Awareness matters because true mediation increases clarity and autonomy. When someone consistently benefits from being in the middle, neutrality may be a role, not a reality. Reframing failures as unavoidable external issues. Reframing failures as unavoidable external issues is a deflection tactic where responsibility is shifted away from personal choices and onto circumstances, systems, or other people. Instead of acknowledging mistakes, the individual presents the outcome as something that simply happened to them. The failure becomes an act of fate rather than a consequence of decisions. This works because humans instinctively sympathize with people who appear to be at the mercy of forces beyond their control. When someone frames themselves as constrained or unlucky, criticism feels unfair. The brain relaxes its demand for accountability because it perceives no clear point of intervention. If nothing could have been done, then no one is to blame. Emotionally, this tactic exploits compassion and fairness. People want to believe they are reasonable and kind, so they accept explanations that preserve harmony over truth. Over time, repeated reframing trains others to lower expectations. Failures become normalized, and scrutiny fades. The individual avoids growth while maintaining their image. There is also a narrative advantage. By controlling the story, the person controls memory. Listeners remember the obstacle, not the decision. The explanation sounds mature, contextual, even insightful, while quietly erasing agency from the equation. This makes the failure feel complex rather than preventable. The emotional cost builds quietly. Teams absorb the burden, patterns repeat, and frustration accumulates without resolution. Awareness matters because external factors are real, but when every failure is blamed on them, accountability disappears. Without ownership, improvement becomes impossible, and the cycle continues unchallenged. Overpromising with no intent to deliver. Overpromising with no intent to deliver is a manipulation tactic built on hope rather than action. It relies on saying exactly what others want to hear, not to create results, but to secure time, trust, approval, or advantage in the present moment. The promise becomes currency, exchanged for patience, effort, or silence. This works because humans are emotionally wired to respond to future rewards. The brain releases motivation and relief when it believes a positive outcome is coming. Once hope is activated, scrutiny drops. People stop pushing, stop questioning, and stop protecting themselves because the future has been emotionally prepaid. Emotionally, this tactic exploits optimism and goodwill. Most people want to believe others mean what they say. When a promise is framed with confidence and certainty, doubt feels cynical or unfair. Calling it out risks appearing distrustful, so people wait. Time passes. Deadlines shift. The promise remains just out of reach. There is also a power imbalance created by anticipation. The person waiting is emotionally invested, while the promiser has already extracted value. Each delay deepens commitment because admitting the truth would mean accepting betrayal or foolishness. Instead, people rationalize, make excuses for the other person, and hold on longer than they should. The emotional hook is subtle but strong. Hope becomes a leash. The longer delivery is postponed, the harder it feels to walk away. Awareness matters because patterns reveal intent. Promises without progress are not reassurance. They are control disguised as optimism. Using technical jargon to intimidate. Using technical jargon to intimidate is a manipulation tactic that leverages complexity as a substitute for authority. By flooding a conversation with specialized language, acronyms, or abstract concepts, the speaker creates an imbalance where understanding feels out of reach. The goal is not clarity, but control. Confusion becomes the environment in which influence thrives. This works because people fear appearing ignorant. When faced with unfamiliar terminology, the brain shifts from evaluation to self-protection. Questions feel risky. Doubt feels embarrassing. Rather than challenge what they don't understand, many people default to silence or agreement, mistaking incomprehension for personal failure instead of poor communication. Emotionally, this tactic exploits insecurity and status anxiety. The speaker positions themselves as intellectually superior while others feel subtly diminished. Even confident individuals can begin to second-guess themselves, assuming that if something sounds complex, it must be correct. The emotional discomfort of not keeping up overrides the rational impulse to slow the conversation down. This dynamic is especially potent in professional, academic, or technical environments where competence is tied to identity. Jargon becomes a social filter. Those who understand it are in, and those who don't feel excluded. The manipulator benefits by avoiding scrutiny because challenging them would require admitting confusion. The danger lies in how easily this tactic passes as expertise. Complexity is mistaken for depth. Awareness restores balance. True knowledge seeks understanding, not intimidation. When language obscures rather than illuminates, it is often being used not to explain reality, but to dominate the room. Pretending constraints that don't exist. Pretending constraints that don't exist is a manipulation tactic where someone invents limits, rules, or barriers to narrow your choices and quietly steer outcomes in their favor. These constraints often sound reasonable, institutional, or unavoidable. They are framed as external forces rather than personal decisions, which makes them difficult to challenge without seeming naive or unreasonable. This works because the human brain respects boundaries instinctively. When something is presented as a rule, a policy, a deadline, or a limitation, people stop negotiating and start adapting. The moment a constraint is accepted as real, the range of possible responses collapses. You no longer ask what could be done, only what can be done within the invented limits. Emotionally, this tactic exploits resignation. People dislike fighting systems they believe are rigid or impersonal. Arguing against a policy feels futile, and pushing back against a requirement feels like wasted energy. The manipulator hides behind these false barriers, avoiding accountability while maintaining control. There is also safety and constraint for the listener. Limits reduce cognitive load. They simplify decisions and remove responsibility. Accepting the constraint can feel like relief, even when it leads to worse outcomes. The person enforcing the imaginary boundary becomes the authority guiding you through an unavoidable reality. Over time, repeated exposure to false constraints trains compliance. People stop questioning structure altogether. The most dangerous part is that these limits often go unverified. Awareness breaks the illusion. Real constraints can be explained, sourced, and tested. Imaginary ones rely entirely on your willingness to accept them without resistance. Information hoarding in teams. Information hoarding in teams is a control tactic where someone deliberately withholds knowledge, context, or updates in order to maintain leverage and relevance. Instead of sharing what they know freely, they drip-feed information only when it benefits them. This transforms knowledge into currency and collaboration into dependency. This works because information equals momentum. When people lack clarity, progress slows, confidence weakens, and decision-making becomes fragile. The person holding the missing pieces becomes the bottleneck, and by extension, the authority. Others begin to rely on them, not because of superior skill, but because access has been artificially restricted. Emotionally, this tactic exploits insecurity and fear of error. Team members hesitate to act without full context, worried about making mistakes or appearing uninformed. That hesitation reinforces the hoarder's position. Each time they clarify or correct something, their perceived value increases, even though the confusion was avoidable. There is also an emotional reward for the hoarder. Being the one who knows feels powerful. It creates a quiet sense of superiority and control, especially in environments where recognition is tied to expertise. Over time, the hoarder may convince themselves they are protecting quality or preventing chaos, when in reality, they are manufacturing it. The damage accumulates subtly. Trust erodes, collaboration suffers, and resentment grows beneath polite interactions. Teams become fragmented, innovation slows, and capable people disengage. Awareness is critical because healthy teams distribute information to empower action. When knowledge is consistently centralized around one person, it's not leadership, it's leverage disguised as competence. Taking advantage of defaults and inertia. Taking advantage of defaults and inertia is a manipulation tactic that works by doing almost nothing at all. Instead of persuading or pressuring, it relies on human passivity. When an option is presented as the standard, pre-selected, or already in motion, most people go along with it simply because changing course requires effort, attention, and emotional energy. This works because the brain treats inaction as safety. Defaults feel neutral, even when they are not. Choosing nothing feels like choosing stability. To question or alter a default requires thinking, responsibility, and the risk of making the wrong choice. Many people unconsciously decide that staying with what's already set is safer than engaging with uncertainty. Emotionally, this tactic exploits avoidance. People avoid friction, paperwork, awkward conversations, or the fear of standing out. The manipulator benefits from silence and delay. Every moment someone doesn't opt out, object, or intervene becomes silent consent. Over time, the default hardens into reality, and reversing it feels disruptive or unreasonable. There is also a psychological comfort in momentum. Once something is underway, stopping it feels like loss. Even if the situation is unfair or misaligned, continuing feels easier than admitting a change is needed. The person benefiting from the default appears blameless, claiming nothing was forced and everything was optional. The emotional hook is subtle, but powerful. People later feel regret without remembering when they agreed. Awareness matters because defaults are decisions made in advance. When you recognize inertia as influence, you reclaim the ability to choose rather than drift into outcomes you never consciously selected. Asking leading questions to guide answers. Asking leading questions to guide answers is a manipulation tactic that shapes conclusions before the other person realizes a conclusion is being formed. Instead of openly stating an opinion or desire, the manipulator embeds it inside the question itself, steering the emotional and cognitive direction of the response. The person answering feels like they are expressing their own thoughts, when in reality, they are being gently funneled toward a predetermined outcome. This works because the brain treats questions differently than statements. Questions lower defenses. They signal curiosity rather than control. When a question contains an assumption, the mind often accepts that assumption automatically in order to respond. The focus shifts to answering, not evaluating whether the premise of the question is valid in the first place. Emotionally, this tactic exploits trust and cooperation. Most people want to be helpful and reasonable in conversation. When asked a question, they instinctively engage. If the question subtly frames one answer as logical, moral, or expected, resisting, it feels awkward. Disagreement now requires extra effort because the person must first dismantle the hidden framing before giving a different answer. Leading questions are especially powerful in sensitive or high-stakes situations. They can introduce guilt, responsibility, or agreement without ever making a direct claim. Over time, repeated framing can reshape how someone remembers events or interprets their own beliefs, blurring the line between influence and consent. The manipulation is difficult to spot because it feels conversational, not coercive. Control is exercised quietly through implication rather than assertion. Awareness is the key defense, because once the framing is noticed, the question loses its power and the conversation can return to genuine choice instead of guided compliance. Exploiting authority bias. Exploiting authority bias is a psychological manipulation tactic that leverages people's instinctive tendency to defer to those they perceive as powerful, knowledgeable, or legitimate. It does not require actual authority, only the appearance of it. Titles, confident tone, credentials, uniforms, or associations are enough to trigger automatic compliance before critical thinking has time to engage. This works because the human brain is wired for hierarchy. From childhood, people are conditioned to trust teachers, obey leaders, and assume that authority figures know better. Questioning authority once carried social and even physical risk, so the brain learned to equate obedience with safety. When authority cues appear, skepticism feels dangerous, unnecessary, or inappropriate. Emotionally, this tactic exploits insecurity and fear of being wrong. Challenging someone who sounds authoritative risks embarrassment, conflict, or social punishment. Many people would rather doubt themselves than confront someone who appears confident and elevated. Silence becomes self-protection, even when something feels off. Authority bias also creates moral outsourcing. When someone in power makes a decision, others feel relieved of responsibility. If the outcome is bad, blame feels transferable. This emotional relief makes compliance seductive. People stop evaluating actions on merit and start evaluating them based on who suggested them. The manipulation deepens when authority is paired with urgency or complexity. Under pressure, the brain looks for shortcuts, and authority becomes the fastest one. "They must know" replaces "does this make sense?" Questions die before they are formed. The danger is that authority bias bypasses consent and reasoning without announcing itself. It feels like respect, professionalism, or common sense. Awareness restores balance. True authority invites questions and withstands scrutiny. When power depends on silence rather than understanding, influence is being extracted, not earned. Delaying responses to gain leverage. Delaying responses to gain leverage is a power tactic where silence is used as pressure rather than absence. By withholding replies, decisions, or acknowledgement, the individual creates uncertainty that shifts emotional weight onto the other person. The delay itself becomes a message, even though nothing is said. This works because humans are highly sensitive to unresolved situations. When communication stops, the brain fills the gap with anxiety. People begin to wonder what they did wrong, what is being decided without them, or whether they are about to lose something. That uncertainty weakens confidence and increases the desire for resolution, often at any cost. Emotionally, this tactic exploits anticipation and fear of rejection. The longer the silence stretches, the more power it gains. The waiting party starts overthinking, softening their position, or preparing concessions just to restore contact. When the response finally arrives, relief overrides scrutiny and the leverage shifts toward the person who controlled the timing. Silence also creates asymmetry. The person delaying feels calm and in control, while the other feels exposed and reactive. This imbalance can influence negotiations, conflicts, and decisions without a single argument being made. The delay frames the responder as busy, important, or above the urgency of others. The emotional toll accumulates quietly. Stress builds, self-doubt creeps in, and boundaries blur. Awareness matters because intentional silence is not neutrality, it is strategy. When delays are consistent and selective, they are not about time, they are about control. Using partial apologies to end discussion. Using partial apologies to end discussion is a conflict control tactic that mimics accountability without actually accepting it. It sounds like resolution, but functions as a shutdown. Phrases that acknowledge feelings without addressing actions create the illusion of responsibility, while protecting the person from change, repair, or consequences. This works because apologies are emotionally powerful. When someone hears words that resemble remorse, the brain relaxes. Tension drops. The desire for closure kicks in. Most people are wired to accept peace when it's offered, even if that peace is incomplete. The moment an apology is spoken, Continuing the conversation starts to feel uncomfortable, aggressive, or unnecessary. Emotionally, this tactic exploits social norms around forgiveness. Once someone says, "sorry," pushing further risks making you look unforgiving or difficult. The focus subtly shifts away from the harm done and onto your reaction. If you persist, you are framed as the problem for not letting it go, even though nothing was truly resolved. Partial apologies often avoid ownership by centering intent or emotion instead of impact. They acknowledge that something happened, but not responsibility for it. This keeps power with the speaker. They gain relief, reset the social balance, and move forward unchanged, while the other person is left carrying unresolved frustration or confusion. The emotional hook is exhaustion. People want conflict to end. A partial apology offers an exit, even if it's hollow. Awareness matters because real accountability brings clarity, not silence. When an apology ends discussion without repair, it isn't healing, it's containment. Creating false dilemmas. Creating false dilemmas is a manipulation tactic that compresses complex reality into a narrow, emotionally charged choice, forcing someone to pick between two options while quietly hiding all others. It presents the situation as binary when it is not, turning nuance into pressure and reflection into urgency. The power of this tactic lies not in what is offered, but in what is deliberately removed from view. This works because the brain seeks simplicity under stress. When faced with tension, conflict, or uncertainty, people want clean answers and clear paths. A false dilemma offers psychological relief by framing the situation as solvable right now, even if the solution is distorted. The mind latches onto the presented options because they feel tangible, while unseen alternatives fade into irrelevance. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear and responsibility. One option is usually framed as dangerous, selfish, or foolish, while the other is framed as reasonable, moral, or inevitable. Choosing against the framed right option feels like choosing failure, conflict, or loss. The emotional weight pushes the person toward compliance, not because it is correct, but because it feels safer. False dilemmas are especially effective in high-stakes conversations where emotions are already elevated. Once the frame is accepted, resistance looks irrational. Questioning the premise feels like avoiding reality. The person begins defending a choice they were never meant to question in the first place. The manipulation is subtle because it feels logical. Two choices are offered, after all, but logic collapses when options are artificially limited. Awareness reopens the mental space. When a situation feels forced into either this or that, it is often a sign that the most important choices are the ones you were never shown. Selective memory of past agreements. Selective memory of past agreements is a manipulation tactic where someone conveniently forgets, distorts, or reinterprets prior commitments to escape responsibility or gain leverage. It is not blatant denial. It is subtle erosion. The facts are blurred just enough to introduce doubt, and that doubt does the heavy lifting. This works because memory is inherently fragile. People assume shared experiences are remembered similarly, so when one person confidently recalls events differently, the brain hesitates. Certainty feels persuasive. The person with selective memory speaks as if their version is obvious, making others question their own recollection rather than challenge the narrative. Emotionally, this tactic exploits discomfort with conflict and self-doubt. Many people fear being wrong more than being wronged. When confronted with a different account, they soften their stance to avoid escalation. Over time, this creates a pattern where the manipulator's version becomes the default, not because it is accurate, but because it is repeated without resistance. Selective memory also benefits from time. As details fade naturally, reinterpretation becomes easier. Small shifts go unnoticed. What was once a clear agreement becomes a vague understanding. Responsibility dissolves into ambiguity, and accountability has nothing solid to stand on. The emotional damage compounds quietly. Trust erodes as people feel gaslit without being able to prove it. They may start documenting, over-explaining, or disengaging altogether. Awareness matters because consistency reveals truth. Genuine misunderstandings invite clarification. Strategic forgetting resists it. When someone's memory always changes in their favor, the issue is not recall, it is control. Leveraging guilt to extract concessions. Leveraging guilt to extract concessions is a manipulation tactic where emotional discomfort is used as a bargaining chip. Instead of making clear requests or arguments, the individual implies that refusal would make the other person selfish, ungrateful, or morally lacking. The pressure doesn't come from logic, it comes from the fear of being a bad person. This works because guilt is one of the most powerful social emotions. From an early age, people are conditioned to maintain harmony and avoid causing disappointment. When guilt is activated, the brain prioritizes emotional relief over fairness. Saying yes becomes a way to escape discomfort, not a reflection of genuine agreement. Emotionally, this tactic exploits empathy and relational obligation. The manipulator may reference sacrifices they made, hardships they endured, or expectations they believe are obvious. Even when those sacrifices were voluntary or unrelated, they are framed as debts that must now be repaid. The target feels responsible for emotions they did not create. Over time, this creates a one-sided dynamic. Boundaries erode as concessions become habitual. The person being guilted may feel drained, resentful, or trapped, yet struggle to articulate why. Each refusal feels heavier than the last, while each concession reinforces the manipulator's belief that the tactic works. The emotional damage compounds quietly, autonomy weakens, self-trust fades, and relationships become transactional under the surface. Awareness is critical because guilt should signal reflection, not compliance. When guilt is consistently used to get what someone wants, it stops being about care and starts being about control. Timing requests. When resistance is low. Timing requests. When resistance is low is a psychological manipulation tactic that targets people not through argument, but through vulnerability. Instead of convincing someone, it waits for moments when their defenses are naturally weakened. Fatigue, distraction, emotional openness, relief, or stress create windows where saying no feels harder than saying yes. This works because resistance requires energy. When people are tired, overwhelmed, or mentally occupied, the brain prioritizes ease and emotional comfort over careful evaluation. In those moments, agreeing feels like the path of least resistance. The request itself may not be unreasonable, but the timing strips the person of the clarity needed to assess it properly. Emotionally, this tactic exploits trust and situational softness. After a long day, during moments of gratitude, or immediately following good news or conflict resolution, people are more compliant. Their guard is down. They want to preserve the mood, avoid tension, or simply rest. A request placed here feels intrusive to refuse, almost like spoiling the moment. There is also a subtle guilt mechanism at play. When someone asks at a vulnerable time, declining can feel cruel, ungrateful, or unnecessarily firm. The person receiving the request may agree automatically, only realizing later that they didn't truly consent from a place of strength or intention. The emotional hook is that the pressure doesn't feel external, it feels like your own choice. But timing shapes choice as much as content. Awareness matters because when you learn to notice your internal state, you reclaim agency. Decisions made when resistance is low often reflect exhaustion, not alignment, and recognizing that difference changes everything. Rewriting history after outcomes are known. Rewriting history after outcomes are known is a manipulation tactic where someone reshapes past events to make themselves appear smarter, more competent, or more justified in hindsight. Once the result is clear, the story quietly changes. Uncertainty disappears, doubts are erased, and risks are reframed as calculated moves that were obvious all along. This works because memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. The brain naturally edits the past to create coherent narratives, and manipulators exploit this weakness. When someone confidently retells events with the benefit of hindsight, listeners often absorb that version as truth, even if it contradicts what actually happened. Confidence fills the gaps where evidence should be. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on the human need for meaning and order. People are uncomfortable with randomness and mistakes. A rewritten history removes chaos and replaces it with inevitability. The manipulator appears wise rather than lucky, decisive rather than reactive. Others may even doubt their own recollection, wondering if they simply misunderstood events at the time. This is especially powerful in leadership, relationships, and group settings. Once outcomes are known, challenging the revised narrative feels pointless or petty. The emotional cost of arguing about the past often outweighs the desire for accuracy, so the new version solidifies unchallenged. Over time, this erodes accountability. Failures are reframed as lessons others misunderstood, while successes are portrayed as proof of foresight. The person rewriting history becomes untouchable because the past itself has been bent in their favor. Awareness matters because truth does not become clearer after the fact, it becomes easier to distort. When certainty suddenly appears only after results are known, the story may be serving ego rather than reality. Using humor to deflect criticism. Using humor to deflect criticism is a manipulation tactic where jokes are deployed as a shield against accountability. Instead of addressing the substance of a concern, the person reframes the moment as playful, exaggerated, or unserious. Laughter replaces reflection, and the original issue quietly dissolves. This works because humor changes emotional temperature instantly. Criticism creates tension, and tension makes people uncomfortable. A joke releases that pressure. The brain prefers relief over resolution, so once laughter enters the room, the need to confront the problem feels less urgent. The conversation shifts from truth to tone. Emotionally, this tactic exploits the fear of being seen as harsh or humorless. If someone raises a concern and it's met with a joke, pushing further risks appearing uptight, aggressive, or socially clumsy, the burden shifts to the critic, who must now decide whether the issue is worth disrupting the mood. Often, it isn't. Humor also creates ambiguity. A joke can mean everything or nothing. If challenged, the speaker can retreat behind intent, claiming innocence. This plausible deniability protects them while subtly invalidating the criticism. The message becomes not, "Is this a problem?" but "Why are you making this a problem?" Over time, repeated deflection trains silence. People learn that raising issues leads nowhere, so they stop trying. Resentment builds beneath laughter, and behavior remains unchanged. The most dangerous part is that humor appears social and friendly, masking avoidance as charm. Awareness restores clarity. Humor can coexist with accountability. But when laughter consistently replaces answers, it is no longer connection. It is evasion, polished just enough to pass unnoticed. Strategic incompetence in shared responsibilities. Strategic incompetence in shared responsibilities is a manipulation tactic where someone deliberately performs tasks poorly, slowly, or inconsistently so that others eventually stop expecting effort from them. Instead of refusing responsibility outright, they create frustration. Over time, the easiest path for everyone else becomes doing the work themselves rather than relying on someone who always seems to struggle. This works because humans are wired to seek efficiency and emotional relief. When a task repeatedly goes wrong, tension builds. Correcting mistakes, giving reminders, or supervising drains energy. Eventually, people choose the path of least resistance. They step in, take over, and quietly lower their expectations, believing it's simply easier that way. Emotionally, this tactic exploits responsibility, patience, and the desire to keep things running smoothly. The competent party feels pressure to prevent failure, embarrassment, or conflict. Meanwhile, the strategically incompetent person benefits from reduced workload without ever appearing lazy or confrontational. Their incompetence looks accidental, even though the pattern is consistent. There is also a subtle power shift. By failing predictably, the manipulator trains others to accommodate them. The group adapts around the weakness rather than addressing it. Over time, roles solidify. One person carries the burden, the other avoids it, and the imbalance becomes normalized. The emotional cost accumulates slowly. Resentment grows beneath cooperation. Burnout replaces goodwill, and trust erodes. The person doing the extra work may feel trapped, knowing that speaking up risks conflict, while staying silent guarantees continued exploitation. Awareness matters because genuine incompetence improves with support, while strategic incompetence remains conveniently unchanged. Playing different sides with different stories. Playing different sides with different stories is a manipulation tactic built on fragmentation. One person presents tailored versions of reality to different people, ensuring no single individual ever sees the full picture. Each story is crafted to fit the listener's expectations, fears, or desires, creating the illusion of alignment while maintaining total control over the narrative. This works because humans assume consistency by default. Most people don't expect others to contradict themselves across contexts, so they never compare notes. The manipulator exploits this trust, positioning themselves as an ally to everyone while never fully committing to any truth. As long as information remains siloed, contradictions stay hidden. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on belonging. Each person feels understood, chosen, and privately aligned with the manipulator. That sense of exclusivity builds loyalty. People become emotionally invested in their version of the relationship or agreement, unaware that others have been promised something incompatible. There is also a powerful fear-based hook. When discrepancies begin to surface, confusion replaces certainty. People doubt their own memory, wondering if they misunderstood or misheard. The manipulator often amplifies this doubt by subtly denying or reframing past statements, deepening the fog and protecting themselves from accountability. The emotional damage is slow but corrosive. Trust between others erodes as they compare fragments of truth and suspect each other rather than the source. The manipulator remains central, appearing as the only stable reference point in a fractured system. Awareness breaks the pattern because this tactic cannot survive transparency. When stories are shared openly, the illusion collapses. What once felt like connection is revealed as control, and clarity replaces the emotional confusion that kept everyone divided. Exploiting fear of conflict. Exploiting fear of conflict is a manipulation tactic that leverages people's deep discomfort with tension, disagreement, and emotional friction to gain quiet control. It works by making resistance feel more painful than compliance. The manipulator doesn't need to argue, threaten, or demand. They simply rely on the fact that many people would rather swallow discomfort than risk confrontation. This works because conflict activates anxiety. For many, disagreement feels dangerous, tied to rejection, punishment, or emotional chaos learned early in life. When a situation hints at possible conflict, the nervous system pushes toward appeasement. Saying yes feels like peace. Saying no feels like lighting a fuse. The manipulator positions themselves as the potential source of that explosion. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on anticipation. Nothing overt has to happen. A sigh, a pause, a change in tone, or a history of overreactions is enough. The target begins managing the other person's emotions preemptively, adjusting behavior to avoid imagined fallout. Over time, this creates a pattern where one person's comfort dictates another person's choices. The power dynamic becomes invisible. The manipulator appears calm or passive, while the other person feels responsible for keeping things smooth. Boundaries erode quietly, not because they were challenged, but because defending them felt too exhausting. Resentment builds internally, while compliance becomes habitual. This tactic is especially effective in relationships, workplaces, and families, where harmony is valued over honesty. The absence of open conflict is mistaken for health, even as imbalance grows. Awareness matters because once fear is named, it loses its grip. Conflict avoided at all costs often costs far more than conflict faced consciously. Burying bad news under good news. Burying bad news under good news is a manipulation tactic that uses emotional contrast to dull impact and avoid accountability. Instead of confronting negative information directly, it is wrapped inside praise, progress, optimism, or unrelated positives. The bad news is not removed, it is diluted, softened, and rushed past while attention is guided elsewhere. This works because the brain processes emotions comparatively. When good news comes first, it raises emotional baseline. The listener feels relieved, optimistic, or validated, and that state weakens resistance. When the bad news follows, it feels smaller than it is. When it comes first and is immediately followed by good news, it feels resolved before it's even understood. Emotionally, this tactic exploits gratitude and relief. Once people feel something positive, they hesitate to disrupt it. Complaining feels ungrateful. Questioning feels pessimistic. The manipulator relies on this emotional inertia, knowing that people are less likely to push back when they've just been given something to feel good about. There is also a pacing advantage. Good news slows the listener down, while bad news is delivered quickly, vaguely, or in technical language. The emotional spotlight stays on the positive, while the negative slips by without proper examination. Later, when consequences surface, the moment to challenge has already passed. Over time, this creates confusion and mistrust. People sense that something is wrong but struggle to pinpoint when it happened. Memory retains the positive framing more than the buried harm. Awareness matters because transparency has emotional weight. Bad news deserves space. When positivity is used to mute truth, optimism becomes a tool of control rather than clarity. Using confidentiality as a shield. Using confidentiality as a shield is a manipulation tactic where secrecy is invoked not to protect sensitive information, but to avoid scrutiny, accountability, or challenge. By labeling actions, decisions, or conversations as confidential, the individual places them beyond questioning. What cannot be discussed cannot be examined, and what cannot be examined cannot be challenged. This works because confidentiality carries moral weight. People associate it with professionalism, trust, and ethical responsibility. Questioning something labeled confidential can feel inappropriate or dangerous, as if you are crossing a line or risking consequences. The brain interprets secrecy as legitimacy, even when no clear reason for the secrecy exists. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear and respect for boundaries. Others hesitate to ask follow-up questions, seek clarification, or involve additional perspectives. They worry about appearing untrustworthy or naive. That hesitation creates isolation, allowing the person invoking confidentiality to control the narrative without opposition. Over time, confidentiality becomes a convenient hiding place. Decisions are made without transparency, patterns go unexamined, and mistakes are quietly buried. The individual appears responsible and composed, while others are kept in the dark, forced to operate with incomplete information and limited agency. The emotional toll accumulates beneath the surface. Confusion grows, trust thins, and frustration builds without a clear outlet. Awareness matters because true confidentiality has scope and purpose. When secrecy is used broadly, selectively, or defensively, it is no longer about protection, it is about power disguised as discretion. Manipulating metrics to look successful. Manipulating metrics to look successful is a perception control tactic where numbers are shaped to tell a flattering story rather than an honest one. Instead of improving reality, the focus shifts to improving appearances. By choosing which measurements matter, which timeframes are highlighted, and which data is quietly ignored, someone can appear effective even when outcomes are weak or deteriorating. This works because numbers feel objective. When people see charts, percentages, or growth figures, their skepticism drops. The brain treats metrics as truth, not realizing how easily context can be altered. A small improvement can be magnified, a larger failure can be buried, and comparison points can be selected to guarantee a win. Emotionally, this tactic exploits authority and relief. Metrics provide certainty in uncertain environments. Leaders, teams, and stakeholders want reassurance that things are working. When clean numbers are presented confidently, people feel safe believing them. Questioning the data feels technical, tedious, or confrontational, so most don't push back. There is also an emotional distancing effect. Metrics replace lived experience. Declining morale, overworked teams, or unhappy customers are dismissed because the numbers look good. Anyone raising concerns appears emotional or negative, while the manipulator stands behind the shield of data. The hook is subtle but powerful. Success becomes a performance rather than a reality. Over time, decision-making drifts further from truth, and problems compound beneath polished reports. Awareness matters because metrics are not neutral. They reflect priorities and incentives. When numbers are used to obscure rather than clarify, they don't measure success. They manufacture it, creating dependency before changing terms. Creating dependency before changing terms is a manipulation tactic that slowly conditions someone to rely on a person, system, or resource before quietly shifting the rules of engagement. At first, the relationship feels supportive, generous, even empowering. Help is freely given, access is easy, and stability feels guaranteed. The dependency forms not through force, but through comfort. This works because the human brain equates consistency with safety. When support is reliable, trust deepens. Over time, routines form and alternatives fade. The dependent person stops preparing for independence because there seems to be no need. The manipulator becomes woven into daily function, decision-making, or emotional regulation, often without the other person noticing the shift. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear of loss and disruption. Once dependency exists, any threat to it triggers anxiety. When the terms change, the focus is no longer on fairness, but on preservation. The dependent person begins negotiating from fear rather than agency, willing to accept worse conditions simply to avoid instability or withdrawal. The change in terms is often gradual and framed as reasonable. Small costs are introduced. Expectations increase. Boundaries move. Because the dependency is already in place, resistance feels risky. The manipulator may even frame the new terms as necessary, deserved, or unavoidable, positioning themselves as the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of control. The emotional trap is powerful because it feels earned. The dependent person may feel guilty for questioning someone who helped them so much. That gratitude becomes leverage. Awareness matters because true support increases autonomy, not reliance. When help quietly reduces your ability to walk away, the support was never neutral to begin with. Taking advantage of unclear ownership. Taking advantage of unclear ownership is a manipulation tactic that thrives in ambiguity. When responsibility is not clearly defined, someone can quietly avoid accountability while still benefiting from outcomes. Tasks fall through cracks, credit floats without anchors, and blame has nowhere solid to land. The person exploiting this uncertainty stays comfortably out of reach. This works because humans dislike ambiguity, but rarely confront it directly. When ownership is unclear, people hesitate. They assume someone else is handling it, or they wait for direction rather than stepping forward. The manipulator relies on this hesitation, knowing that inaction creates space to maneuver without consequence. Emotionally, this tactic exploits diffusion of responsibility. When many people could be responsible, no one feels fully responsible. This creates a fog where missed deadlines, errors, or failures feel collective rather than personal. The person benefiting from the ambiguity can later claim misunderstanding or miscommunication, deflecting blame without overt denial. Unclear ownership also allows selective engagement. The manipulator can step in when things go well and step back when they don't. Success becomes shared or claimed. Failure becomes orphaned. Over time, this pattern shapes perception. Others begin to associate the person with wins and distance them from losses, even when the contributions were minimal. The emotional toll appears in frustration and burnout. Those who care pick up slack repeatedly, while those exploiting ambiguity remain unchallenged. Awareness is essential because clarity is protective. When ownership is named, documented, and revisited, ambiguity loses its power. Where responsibility is clearly visible, manipulation has far fewer places to hide. Pretending neutrality while influencing outcomes. Pretending neutrality while influencing outcomes is a manipulation tactic where someone claims objectivity while quietly steering decisions in a direction that benefits them. They position themselves as unbiased observers, mediators, or facilitators, even as they subtly shape perceptions, frame options, and guide conclusions. The power of this tactic lies in its invisibility. This works because neutrality signals trust. When someone appears detached from personal stakes, others lower their defenses. Advice feels safer, opinions feel balanced, and influence goes unnoticed. The manipulator avoids scrutiny by presenting their guidance as common sense rather than self-interest. Emotionally, this tactic exploits the human desire for fairness. People want to believe decisions are being made rationally, not politically. When someone claims neutrality, disagreement feels unreasonable, as if you are challenging logic itself rather than a person. This makes resistance emotionally uncomfortable and socially risky. Influence is exerted through subtle framing. Certain options are emphasized, others minimized. Language is carefully chosen to make one outcome feel natural and another feel extreme or impractical. Because no explicit stance is taken, the manipulation is hard to confront. There is nothing obvious to argue against. Over time, this creates a quiet imbalance of power. The neutral party becomes a trusted authority while shaping outcomes without accountability. Others may sense something is off, but struggle to articulate it. Awareness is critical because true neutrality does not push. When someone consistently influences without owning their position, they are not impartial. They are protected, overusing exceptions until they become norms. Overusing exceptions until they become norms is a gradual manipulation tactic that reshapes rules without ever openly challenging them. It begins with a single deviation, framed as special, temporary, or harmless. An exception feels reasonable, even compassionate, but once repeated, the exception quietly erodes the rule it was meant to bypass. This works because humans adapt faster than they question. The brain normalizes patterns through repetition. What once felt unusual begins to feel familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for legitimacy. Each exception lowers resistance to the next, until the original standard feels outdated or unrealistic, even though nothing was formally changed. Emotionally, this tactic exploits flexibility and goodwill. People want to be accommodating. Saying yes to an exception feels cooperative, humane, and practical. Saying no feels rigid or unfair. Over time, those granting flexibility begin to feel trapped by their own leniency, unsure when or how to reassert boundaries without appearing inconsistent or harsh. There is also a diffusion of responsibility at play. When exceptions are spread across time and people, no single moment feels like a violation. Accountability dissolves into ambiguity. The person benefiting from the exceptions gains more freedom, while others quietly adjust their expectations downward. The emotional hook is resignation. People stop resisting not because they agree, but because pushing back feels exhausting or pointless. The rule still exists on paper, but no longer in practice. Awareness matters because exceptions are powerful, not in isolation, but in accumulation. When flexibility becomes habitual, norms don't change loudly, they disappear quietly. Exploiting cultural or language gaps. Exploiting cultural or language gaps is a manipulation tactic that takes advantage of misunderstanding, unfamiliar norms, or communication barriers to gain leverage without overt force. When someone lacks full fluency, linguistic or cultural, they are already operating at a disadvantage. The manipulator steps into that gap, shaping meaning, expectations, and outcomes while appearing helpful or authoritative. This works because uncertainty weakens confidence. When people are unsure whether they understood something correctly, they hesitate to challenge it. Cultural rules are often unspoken, and language gaps make people doubt their instincts. The brain shifts into self-monitoring mode, focused on not making mistakes rather than defending interests. That hesitation creates space for exploitation. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on vulnerability and shame. People fear appearing ignorant, disrespectful, or out of place. They may assume that confusion is their fault, not realizing that information is being selectively framed or withheld. The manipulator benefits from this self-blame as it discourages questions and reinforces compliance. This dynamic is especially potent in environments involving bureaucracy, contracts, authority figures, or high-stakes decisions. Subtle misinterpretations, omitted explanations, or culturally loaded assumptions can drastically alter outcomes while remaining difficult to contest. Even when something feels wrong, the person may override that feeling, assuming they simply don't get it. The harm lies in how invisible the manipulation can be. It often hides behind politeness or professionalism. Awareness restores agency. When clarity is denied and confusion persists, it is not always a gap in understanding. Sometimes the gap itself is being used as the tool of control. Leveraging deadlines. Others care about more. Leveraging deadlines. Others care about more is a manipulation tactic that shifts pressure asymmetrically, allowing one person to remain calm while another feels trapped by time. The power doesn't come from the deadline itself, but from unequal emotional investment in it. When one side is desperate for closure and the other is not, leverage silently changes hands. This works because deadlines create urgency, and urgency creates vulnerability. The person who stands to lose more if time runs out experiences rising stress, narrowed focus, and a growing willingness to compromise. Meanwhile, the person who is unaffected by the deadline can delay, withhold, or renegotiate without emotional cost. Time becomes a weapon wielded by indifference. Emotionally, this tactic exploits responsibility and fear of consequences. People who care about deadlines often feel accountable to others, to systems, or to their own standards. Missing the deadline feels like failure, embarrassment, or loss of control. That emotional weight pushes them to accept unfavorable terms just to make the pressure stop. The manipulator benefits by appearing patient and reasonable, while the other side unravels internally. Each delay increases imbalance. Concessions that would have been rejected days earlier now feel necessary. The person under pressure may even rationalize the outcome as pragmatic, mistaking coercion for compromise. This dynamic often goes unnoticed because nothing overtly aggressive occurs. No threats are made, no rules are broken. Time simply passes. Awareness matters because leverage tied to deadlines is not about fairness, but about whose anxiety is doing the negotiating. When urgency is one-sided, decisions stop reflecting value and start reflecting relief. Using vague praise instead of real rewards. Using vague praise instead of real rewards is a manipulation tactic where verbal affirmation is substituted for tangible recognition, compensation, or growth. Instead of offering concrete outcomes, the individual dispenses generic compliments that sound positive but change nothing. Appreciation becomes currency, used to motivate continued effort without meaningful return. This works because praise triggers emotional validation. Humans crave acknowledgement, especially when they invest time and energy. When someone hears, "You're doing great," or "We really value you," the brain releases a brief sense of satisfaction. That emotional hit can temporarily override the absence of real progress, making people feel seen even when they are not being supported. Emotionally, this tactic exploits hope and loyalty. Vague praise keeps people engaged by implying future reward without committing to it. The lack of specificity allows endless delay. Because nothing concrete was promised, nothing can be claimed. The person receiving praise is left waiting, interpreting tone as intent and words as progress. Over time, this creates a subtle imbalance. Effort continues, expectations rise, but outcomes remain static. The praised individual may hesitate to ask for more, fearing they will seem ungrateful or transactional. Gratitude replaces negotiation. Meanwhile, the person giving praise benefits from sustained performance at minimal cost. The emotional toll builds quietly. Motivation fades, cynicism grows, and trust erodes as words lose their meaning. Praise begins to feel hollow, even manipulative, yet confronting it feels uncomfortable because nothing overtly wrong was said. Awareness matters because genuine recognition is specific and backed by action. When praise never translates into reward, it stops being appreciation and becomes a tool to extract more for less. Testing boundaries with minor violations first. Testing boundaries with minor violations first is a gradual manipulation tactic designed to measure tolerance before escalating control. It starts small, something easily dismissed, slightly inappropriate, mildly unfair, or just uncomfortable enough to notice, but not enough to confront. The real goal isn't the violation itself, but the reaction it produces. This works because humans are conflict avoidant. When a boundary is crossed just a little, the brain debates whether it's worth it to respond. People worry about overreacting, misinterpreting intent, or creating unnecessary tension. Silence, hesitation, or nervous laughter becomes data. Each non-response signals permission, even if no permission was consciously given. Emotionally, this tactic exploits self-doubt. The person being tested often minimizes their own discomfort, telling themselves it wasn't a big deal. That internal override weakens future resistance. Once a boundary has been crossed without consequence, restoring it later feels harder. The manipulator learns where the limits are and how softly they need to push to move them. There is also a conditioning effect. Small violations normalize imbalance. What once felt wrong begins to feel familiar, and familiarity dulls alarm. By the time the behavior becomes clearly inappropriate or harmful, the pattern is already established, and pushing back feels disruptive rather than protective. The emotional hook is gradual erosion. No single moment feels serious enough to act on, but the cumulative effect is loss of agency. Awareness matters because boundaries are not defended all at once. They are defended at first contact. Minor violations are rarely accidental. They are probes, and how they are answered determines what comes next. Hiding intent. Behind best practices. Hiding intent behind best practices is a manipulation tactic that uses the language of professionalism, expertise, and norms to disguise personal agendas. By framing decisions as standard, proven, or widely accepted, the manipulator removes them from debate. What sounds like guidance is often control, and what feels like objectivity is frequently preference dressed up as necessity. This works because best practices carry implied authority. They suggest that thinking has already been done elsewhere by smarter people, larger systems, or industry leaders. The brain relaxes in the presence of perceived consensus and expertise. Questioning feels inefficient, even reckless, as if challenging the rule means challenging competence itself. The decision no longer feels personal, it feels inevitable. Emotionally, this tactic exploits insecurity and fear of standing out. People worry about appearing uninformed, unprofessional, or difficult if they push back. The phrase best practice subtly shames dissent by implying that alternatives are inferior or naive. Over time, individuals stop asking why something is done and start focusing only on how to comply. The manipulation deepens because intent is hidden behind abstraction. Personal benefit disappears behind process. Accountability blurs. If outcomes are harmful or unfair, responsibility is deflected onto standards rather than choices. Those affected may feel frustrated but unable to articulate why, because the language used sounds reasonable and neutral. This tactic is powerful precisely because it sounds responsible. But best practices are not laws of nature, they are contextual tools. Awareness restores agency. When something is justified by norms rather than reasons, it's worth asking who benefits, who decided, and what alternatives were quietly removed from the conversation. Exploiting reciprocity norms. Exploiting reciprocity norms is a manipulation tactic that turns generosity into leverage. It begins with a favor, a gift, a gesture of help that appears thoughtful and unsolicited, but beneath the surface, it creates an invisible debt. The moment something is received, an emotional imbalance forms, and the pressure to restore that balance quietly takes hold. This works because reciprocity is deeply ingrained in human psychology. From early social conditioning, people learn that accepting without giving back feels wrong. The brain interprets imbalance as social risk. Being in someone's debt triggers discomfort, even when no repayment has been requested. That discomfort becomes the lever. Emotionally, this tactic exploits guilt and the desire to be seen as fair, grateful, and decent. When the favor giver later asks for something, the request feels heavier than it should. Saying no feels like a moral failure, not a neutral choice. The target may comply, not because they want to, but because refusing threatens their self-image. The manipulation deepens because the initial favor often feels small or harmless. That makes the later request seem reasonable by comparison, even when it isn't. The brain anchors on the kindness, not the cost. People underestimate how much influence the exchange has created. This tactic is especially effective because it feels positive. There is no hostility, no pressure, no overt demand, just kindness followed by expectation. Awareness breaks the cycle. Genuine generosity does not keep score. When a favor creates obligation rather than goodwill, reciprocity has shifted from social glue into social control, letting others fail to look better by comparison. Letting others fail to look better by comparison is a manipulation tactic where someone withholds support, guidance, or intervention so that another person's struggle highlights their own competence. Instead of contributing to shared success, they allow problems to unfold because contrast benefits them. The failure of others becomes a backdrop that makes them appear stronger, smarter, or more reliable. This works because humans evaluate performance relatively, not objectively. Success feels more impressive when surrounded by visible failure. By staying just competent enough and remaining uninvolved when help is needed, the manipulator preserves plausible deniability while benefiting from the comparison. They didn't cause the failure, they simply didn't prevent it. Emotionally, this tactic exploits trust and expectation. People assume teammates will speak up if something is wrong or offer help when they can. When that assumption is violated, the emotional impact is delayed. Only after the damage is done does the absence of support become clear, by which point the narrative has already formed. There is also a quiet cruelty in this tactic. The person failing often internalizes the outcome, blaming themselves for something that could have been mitigated. Meanwhile, the manipulator is praised for stability or foresight, even though their advantage came from silence. Over time, this corrodes team dynamics. Fear replaces collaboration, people guard information, and trust collapses. Awareness matters because healthy competence lifts others. When someone consistently shines only when others fall, their success is not independent, it is extracted from someone else's failure using selective transparency. Using selective transparency is a manipulation tactic where someone appears open and honest while carefully controlling what is revealed and what is concealed. It creates the impression of trustworthiness without the vulnerability of full truth. By sharing certain details freely and withholding others strategically, a person shapes perception while avoiding accountability. This works because transparency is emotionally disarming. When someone volunteers information, the brain relaxes. Guard drops. Skepticism fades. People assume that openness in one area implies openness everywhere. Selective transparency exploits that assumption by offering safe truths that distract from more consequential omissions. Emotionally, this tactic feeds on reassurance. The listener feels informed, included, and respected. That feeling reduces the urge to probe deeper. Questions feel unnecessary, even intrusive, because the speaker already seems forthcoming. The silence around missing information becomes invisible, not suspicious. There is also a control element in pacing. By choosing when to disclose and when to withhold, the manipulator controls the emotional rhythm of the relationship or situation. Information is released only when it serves their narrative, their timing, or their protection. Others react to what is shown, unaware of what remains hidden. The emotional hook lies in false safety. Selective transparency makes people feel like insiders while keeping them structurally dependent on incomplete knowledge. When outcomes later turn negative, confusion replaces clarity. People struggle to pinpoint what went wrong because nothing shared was technically false. Awareness matters because honesty is not measured by how much is said, but by what is intentionally left unsaid. Transparency that avoids risk is not openness, it is performance. When information feels curated rather than whole, trust should slow down, not deepen. Redirecting blame to systems instead of choices. Redirecting blame to systems instead of choices is a manipulation tactic that dissolves personal responsibility by hiding it inside structure, policy, or process. When outcomes go wrong, the focus shifts away from the decision maker and onto an abstract machine. The system becomes the culprit, and the human behind the choice quietly disappears. This works because systems feel impersonal and immovable. People are conditioned to accept bureaucracy, rules, and processes as forces beyond individual control. When someone says, "That's just how the system works," it triggers resignation rather than resistance. The brain stops searching for accountability because it assumes none exists. Anger fades into helplessness. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fatigue and powerlessness. Challenging a person feels possible. Challenging a system feels exhausting. The manipulator benefits by framing their actions as constrained, unavoidable, or mandated, even when they had discretion. Sympathy may even shift toward them, casting them as another victim of the same system rather than the architect of harm. This redirection also fractures responsibility across distance. When blame is spread thinly across policies, workflows, or institutions, no single action feels worth confronting. People doubt their instincts, wondering if they are being unfair by personalizing what has been presented as structural. That doubt protects the individual who made the choice. Over time, this erodes trust and agency. Harm repeats because no one is held accountable. Only processes are discussed. The emotional damage is subtle but persistent, leaving people frustrated, unheard, and confused about where change can actually happen. Awareness matters because systems don't act on their own. Every system is animated by choices, and when those choices are hidden, power escapes scrutiny while pretending it was never there. Exploiting the bystander effect. Exploiting the bystander effect is a manipulation tactic that takes advantage of people's tendency to freeze when responsibility is shared. When multiple individuals witness a problem, each person subconsciously assumes someone else will step in. Action dissolves into observation, and silence feels safer than initiative. The manipulator thrives in this pause. This works because the human brain looks for social cues before acting. In uncertain situations, people scan others for signals. When no one moves, the brain interprets inaction as information. If others aren't reacting, maybe nothing is wrong. Doubt replaces urgency, and hesitation spreads quietly through the group. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear of standing out. Acting alone risks embarrassment, misinterpretation, or conflict. People worry about overreacting or being wrong in public. The manipulator benefits from this social paralysis, knowing that the presence of many reduces the likelihood of challenge from anyone. The effect is amplified when authority, crowds, or formal settings are involved. Structure makes people feel like intervention isn't their role. Responsibility feels delegated upward or outward. The manipulator can push boundaries, spread misinformation, or behave unethically in plain sight, protected by collective inaction. Over time, this creates normalization. When nothing happens repeatedly, the behavior begins to feel acceptable. People adjust their expectations rather than confront the discomfort of acting alone. The emotional toll shows up later as regret, guilt, or quiet resentment. Awareness breaks the illusion. Responsibility is not divided by numbers. It is delayed by them. When everyone is waiting, the first person to move shatters the spell, revealing that the barrier was never rules or danger, but silence reinforced by fear. Using confidence to mask lack of competence. Using confidence to mask lack of competence is a deception tactic where certainty, assertiveness, and presence are used to substitute for actual understanding or skill. The individual speaks decisively, avoids hesitation, and projects authority, creating the impression of mastery even when their knowledge is shallow or incomplete. Confidence becomes camouflage. This works because the human brain relies on shortcuts when evaluating expertise. Confidence is often mistaken for competence, especially in fast-paced or high-pressure environments. When someone sounds sure of themselves, others assume they know something valuable. Doubt feels contagious, while certainty feels stabilizing, even when it is unfounded. Emotionally, this tactic exploits insecurity and fear of appearing uninformed. People hesitate to challenge confident individuals because questioning them risks embarrassment or exposure. Silence becomes safer than confrontation. Over time, the confident person's assertions go untested, allowing errors and misinformation to spread unchecked. There is also an emotional dominance at play. Confidence sets the tone of the room. Those who speak forcefully shape narratives, control pacing, and discourage nuance. The lack of substance is hidden behind momentum. By the time gaps are noticed, decisions may already be locked in. The emotional cost accumulates quietly. Capable voices withdraw, standards erode, and outcomes suffer. Trust shifts from evidence to performance. Awareness matters because real competence welcomes questions and adapts under scrutiny. When confidence resists examination, it is not strength, it is a shield protecting fragility. Making things harder, so people give up. Making things harder so people give up is a control tactic that relies on exhaustion rather than opposition. Instead of saying no outright, obstacles are quietly added until persistence feels pointless. Extra steps, unclear processes, slow responses, shifting requirements, or unnecessary complexity create friction that drains motivation. The goal is not to block directly, but to make continuation emotionally and mentally expensive. This works because effort has a psychological cost. Each added hurdle increases cognitive load, and the brain begins to question whether the outcome is worth the strain. When progress feels slow or confusing, people interpret it as a signal to stop. Giving up starts to feel rational, even self-protective, rather than forced. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fatigue and self-doubt. As difficulty increases, people wonder if they are missing something, doing something wrong, or asking for too much. That uncertainty turns inward. Instead of blaming the system, they blame themselves. Confidence erodes, urgency fades, and the original desire weakens. There is also a quiet power in deniability. The person creating friction can appear neutral or even cooperative. Nothing is explicitly refused. Everything is technically possible, just inconvenient. This makes resistance harder to justify and complaints feel petty. Others may even defend the complexity, assuming it must exist for a reason. The emotional hook is resignation. When effort outweighs perceived reward, disengagement feels like relief. The tactic succeeds not by confrontation, but by attrition. Awareness matters because difficulty is not always accidental. When something consistently feels harder than it needs to be, the barrier may not be structural. It may be strategic. Controlling agendas to control outcomes. Controlling agendas to control outcomes is a subtle power tactic that shapes decisions long before any discussion actually begins. Whoever decides what gets discussed, in what order, and for how long quietly determines what is possible. By structuring the conversation itself, the manipulator influences conclusions without ever needing to argue for them directly. This works because attention is finite. What appears on the agenda feels important, and what is excluded feels irrelevant. When topics are ordered strategically, early items frame how later ones are interpreted, while rushed or last-minute items receive less scrutiny. The brain assumes that what is prioritized must matter most, even if that priority was chosen for convenience rather than truth. Emotionally, this tactic exploits cognitive fatigue and compliance. As discussions progress, energy drops and resistance weakens. Difficult or controversial decisions placed at the end are more likely to be approved just to bring closure. Participants feel pressure to move on, not to dig deeper. Agreement becomes a form of relief rather than conviction. Agenda control also limits opposition by shaping preparation. If people don't know what will be discussed, they can't prepare objections, data, or alternatives. Surprises favor those who plan them. Others may feel off balance, confused, or unsure why something feels wrong, but unable to articulate it in the moment. The manipulation hides behind organization and efficiency. It looks responsible, even helpful, but structure is never neutral. Awareness matters because outcomes are often decided before a single word is spoken. When control over conversation flow is centralized, influence is already in play, quietly steering decisions under the cover of process. Exploiting fear of missing out. Exploiting fear of missing out is a manipulation tactic that turns possibility into pressure by making people feel that hesitation equals loss. It frames inaction as a mistake and waiting as a risk. The emotional engine behind it is not desire, but anxiety. The fear is not of choosing wrong, but of being left behind. This works because humans are intensely social and comparative. People measure their progress, success, and belonging relative to others. When something is presented as limited, exclusive, or already being embraced by everyone else, the brain fills in a painful image, others advancing while you stall. That imagined gap creates urgency far stronger than logic. Emotionally, this tactic exploits insecurity and regret avoidance. People are more haunted by opportunities they believe they missed than by mistakes they made. The idea of later realizing I should have acted triggers discomfort in the present. To avoid future regret, people rush toward choices they haven't fully evaluated. The manipulation deepens through social proof. Seeing or hearing that others are participating makes resistance feel isolating. Saying no starts to feel like opting out of relevance, connection, or success. The desire to belong overrides the need to understand. This tactic also collapses reflection time. When fear of missing out is activated, questions feel dangerous. Slowing down feels like falling behind. The person applying pressure doesn't need to convince you of value, only of scarcity and momentum. Awareness matters because real opportunities remain valuable under scrutiny. When something depends on panic to succeed, the urgency is doing the persuading, not the substance. Fear of missing out is powerful because it feels personal, but it is often engineered to make you move before you think. Using procedural technicalities to win disputes. Using procedural technicalities to win disputes is a manipulation tactic where rules, policies, or formal processes are exploited to override fairness, context, or intent. Instead of engaging with the substance of an issue, the individual focuses on loopholes, timing errors, formatting mistakes, or minor violations to claim victory. The argument shifts from what is right to what is allowed. This works because systems are designed to value order over nuance. Procedures create structure, but they also create hiding places. When someone invokes technical compliance, they gain the protection of legitimacy. Challenging them begins to feel like challenging the system itself, even when the outcome clearly contradicts common sense. Emotionally, this tactic exploits exhaustion and intimidation. Most people do not have the energy or appetite to fight process battles. Legal language, policy references, and bureaucratic detail overwhelm emotional and moral reasoning. The person using technicalities appears disciplined and informed, while the other side feels messy or unprepared. There is also a psychological reframing at play. The dispute is no longer about harm, responsibility, or impact. It becomes about rules. Once reframed, Empathy disappears. The human cost fades behind paperwork, deadlines, and clauses. The manipulator avoids accountability by claiming their hands are tied. Over time, this erodes trust in systems and relationships. People learn that being right is less important than being procedurally protected. Resentment builds as fairness feels inaccessible. Awareness matters because procedures are meant to serve justice, not replace it. When technicalities consistently override truth, the process has been weaponized. Playing dumb selectively. Playing dumb selectively is a manipulation tactic where someone strategically performs ignorance to avoid responsibility, accountability, or effort, while remaining fully capable when it benefits them. The key is inconsistency. The ignorance appears only in moments where knowledge would require action or consequence and disappears when advantage is at stake. This works because ignorance triggers leniency. People are far more forgiving towards someone who doesn't know than someone who refuses. Confusion softens expectations. The brain reframes the situation as a misunderstanding rather than a choice, lowering emotional pressure and social consequences. Emotionally, this tactic exploits empathy and patience. Others step in to explain, fix, or cover gaps, often repeating themselves and doing extra work. Correcting ignorance feels kinder than confronting avoidance. Over time, the burden shifts quietly from the person pretending not to know onto those around them. There is also a power dynamic hidden in the act. By choosing when to be competent and when not to be, the manipulator controls outcomes while maintaining plausible deniability. If challenged, they can retreat into confusion. If rewarded, they step forward as capable. This unpredictability makes it hard to pin down responsibility. The emotional hook is frustration mixed with doubt. People sense something is off, but struggle to prove intent. They question whether they are being unfair or impatient. Awareness matters because genuine ignorance improves with information. Selective ignorance repeats. When confusion consistently appears only where accountability lives, it is not lack of understanding, it is strategy. Misrepresenting risk levels. Misrepresenting risk levels is a manipulation tactic that distorts how dangerous or safe a situation truly is in order to steer decisions in a preferred direction. By exaggerating threats or downplaying consequences, the manipulator reshapes emotional perception, knowing that people do not respond to facts alone, but to how those facts make them feel. This works because the brain is not wired to calculate risk objectively. It relies on emotion as a shortcut. When risk feels high, fear narrows thinking and pushes toward caution or compliance. When risk feels low, vigilance drops and trust increases. By controlling the emotional tone around risk, the manipulator controls behavior without needing to control reality. Emotionally, this tactic exploits fear, relief, and false reassurance. Overstated danger can pressure people into rushed decisions meant to avoid catastrophe. Understated danger can lull them into agreement they would never give if the full picture were clear. In both cases, the emotional response replaces informed judgment. Misrepresented risk is especially powerful when combined with authority or expertise. People assume that those who know more must be accurately assessing danger. Doubt feels irresponsible. Questioning feels like paranoia or ignorance. The individual's internal warning system is overridden by someone else's confidence. The harm is amplified by timing. Risk is often framed at moments of stress, urgency, or dependency, when emotional regulation is already weakened. Awareness restores balance. When risk is presented without context, comparison, or transparency, it is rarely neutral. True risk assessment invites scrutiny. Manipulated risk demands obedience. Framing exploitation as opportunity. Framing exploitation as opportunity is a manipulation tactic that disguises imbalance as privilege. Instead of acknowledging unequal effort, risk, or reward, the situation is reframed as a chance, a stepping stone, or a favor. The language shifts from what is being taken to what is supposedly being offered, and that reframing alters how the brain evaluates fairness. This works because humans are drawn to growth narratives. Words like opportunity, exposure, experience, and potential trigger hope and ambition. They suggest future payoff that justifies present sacrifice. Once that future reward is imagined, the brain tolerates conditions it would otherwise reject. Emotionally, this tactic exploits optimism and fear of appearing ungrateful. Saying no to an opportunity feels like rejecting progress or admitting a lack of drive. People worry that pushing back will make them seem difficult, entitled, or short-sighted. The manipulator relies on this fear to suppress resistance. There is also a subtle power shift in how consent is framed. When something is labeled an opportunity, declining becomes a personal failure rather than a rational boundary. Responsibility for the imbalance is quietly transferred to the person being exploited, who is told they simply didn't see the value. Over time, this framing normalizes overwork and undercompensation. People internalize the idea that suffering now is the price of success later, even when the payoff never materializes. The emotional damage shows up as burnout masked as ambition. Awareness restores clarity. Opportunity expands options. Exploitation narrows them. When language is used to romanticize imbalance, the promise of growth is often a cover for someone else's gain. Leveraging loyalty to excuse misconduct. Leveraging loyalty to excuse misconduct is a manipulation tactic where emotional allegiance is used to override ethics, accountability, and consequences. The individual frames their behavior as something that should be forgiven, ignored, or protected because of past bonds, shared history, or group identity. Loyalty becomes a shield against responsibility. This works because loyalty is deeply tied to identity. Humans are wired to protect their group, and questioning someone inside that circle can feel like betrayal. When misconduct is framed as an attack on one of us, the brain shifts from moral evaluation to defense mode. The issue stops being the behavior and becomes the relationship. Emotionally, this tactic exploits guilt and fear of exclusion. People worry that speaking up will damage trust, fracture unity, or brand them as disloyal. The pressure is often unspoken but heavy. Silence feels like commitment. Accountability feels like abandonment. As a result, harmful behavior is tolerated longer than it should be. There is also a reframing of character. Past loyalty is presented as proof of goodness, as if it cancels out present harm. The manipulator leans on history to avoid consequences in the moment. Others may even rationalize the behavior, telling themselves it was a one-time mistake or misunderstood. Over time, this corrodes values from the inside. Standards become selective, resentment grows, and ethical lines blur. Awareness matters because loyalty should strengthen integrity, not replace it. When allegiance is used to silence accountability, loyalty is no longer mutual. It is being exploited. Using exhaustion as a negotiation tactic. Using exhaustion as a negotiation tactic is a deliberate strategy that aims to weaken resistance by draining mental, emotional, and physical energy over time. Instead of pushing for agreement directly, it stretches the interaction until clarity erodes and compliance feels like relief. The longer the process lasts, the more the balance of power shifts toward the person who is less affected by the fatigue. This works because exhaustion fundamentally changes how the brain operates. When energy is low, the mind seeks shortcuts. Complex reasoning feels heavy, objections feel pointless, and persistence feels costly. The brain stops asking what is best and starts asking what will end this fastest. In that state, Agreement becomes less about alignment and more about escape. Emotionally, this tactic exploits the human need for rest and closure. Long discussions, repeated revisiting of settled points, late-night conversations, or prolonged back and forth slowly chip away at resolve. Confidence fades, boundaries blur, and people begin to doubt whether holding their position is worth the effort. The manipulator often remains calm and patient, making the exhausted person feel unstable or unreasonable by comparison. There is also a self-blame component. As fatigue sets in, people question their own judgment, wondering if they are being stubborn or overly cautious. Saying yes starts to feel mature, flexible, and cooperative, even when it contradicts their original interests. The emotional hook is subtle but powerful. Exhaustion disguises coercion as choice. By the time energy returns, the decision is already made. Awareness matters because tired consent is not true consent, and agreements reached in depletion rarely reflect genuine intent or long-term well-being. Exploiting unequal access to information. Exploiting unequal access to information is a manipulation tactic that leverages knowledge gaps to gain advantage while maintaining the appearance of fairness. One person operates with a fuller picture, while others are forced to decide, agree, or comply with only fragments. The imbalance is invisible, but its effects are decisive. Those with less information believe they are choosing freely, unaware that the game was tilted before it began. This works because information equals confidence. When people sense they don't have all the facts, they hesitate. That hesitation weakens resistance and increases reliance on whoever seems informed. The manipulator becomes a reference point, subtly guiding interpretation while withholding just enough detail to prevent independent judgment. Control is achieved not by deception, but by asymmetry. Emotionally, this tactic exploits trust and self-doubt. People assume that missing information is accidental or irrelevant, not strategic. They may even feel embarrassed asking questions, worried they should already know. That insecurity keeps them passive, allowing decisions to be shaped by the person who holds the missing pieces. This dynamic is especially powerful in negotiations, workplaces, institutions, and systems where transparency is assumed but not guaranteed. Timelines, criteria, consequences, or alternatives may be selectively disclosed, shaping outcomes while preserving plausible deniability. If challenged, the manipulator can claim nothing was hidden, only that others didn't ask. The emotional harm lies in how disempowering this feels once recognized. People realize they were navigating blind while others had a map. Awareness restores agency. When access to information is unequal, fairness is already compromised. Real collaboration shares context. Control depends on keeping it uneven, delaying bad decisions until others inherit them. Delaying bad decisions until others inherit them is a manipulation tactic that uses time as camouflage. Instead of making a difficult, unpopular, or risky choice, the person postpones action until responsibility quietly transfers to someone else. The problem doesn't disappear. It simply changes hands, along with the consequences. This works because time creates distance, and distance weakens accountability. When a decision is delayed long enough, context fades, urgency shifts, new people step in without full awareness of the history, and the original decision maker is no longer emotionally or socially linked to the outcome. The damage feels detached from its source. Emotionally, this tactic exploits optimism and avoidance. People convince themselves that things might resolve on their own, that the issue isn't urgent yet, or that now isn't the right moment. This self-soothing delay feels responsible in the short term, even though it compounds harm later. When consequences finally surface, they land on someone else's watch. There is also a reputational benefit. By leaving before fallout occurs, the manipulator preserves their image. They are remembered for stability, not collapse. The successor becomes associated with the failure, even if the conditions were inherited and unavoidable. Perception replaces causality. This tactic thrives in systems with turnover, transitions, or shifting leadership. Problems become legacy issues instead of personal ones. The emotional toll falls on those who inherit chaos without context, forced to manage crises they didn't create. Awareness matters because delay is not neutrality. Choosing not to decide is still a decision, one that redistributes harm rather than resolves it. When patterns of postponement consistently protect one person and burden another, time is being used not as patience, but as escape, hiding behind group decisions. Hiding behind group decisions is a deflection tactic where personal responsibility is dissolved into collective agreement. Instead of owning their role in an outcome, the individual frames the decision as something the group chose together, even when they influenced it, supported it, or benefited most from it. Accountability becomes blurred, spread thin enough that no single person can be held responsible. This works because groups diffuse blame. When responsibility is shared, consequences feel lighter. People struggle to confront a collective the way they would confront an individual. The phrase "we decided" creates a psychological shield, signaling consensus and inevitability. Questioning it feels disruptive, even when the result is harmful or unfair. Emotionally, this tactic exploits social discomfort and fear of conflict. Challenging a group decision can feel like challenging belonging itself. Individuals hesitate to speak up because they don't want to appear difficult, disloyal, or isolating themselves from the group. The manipulator relies on that hesitation to stay protected. There is also a quiet rewriting of influence. Those who guided the discussion, framed the options, or steered the outcome disappear into the crowd once accountability is raised. The group becomes a convenient hiding place, even if the power dynamics within it were never equal. Over time, this erodes trust and clarity. Decisions feel impersonal, feedback goes nowhere, and frustration builds without direction. People feel impacted but powerless, unsure who to address or how to change outcomes. Awareness matters because real collaboration includes shared responsibility. When someone consistently disappears into the group only when consequences arise, they are not sharing ownership, they are avoiding it. Selectively enforcing consequences. Selectively enforcing consequences is a manipulation tactic where accountability is applied inconsistently to shape behavior through fear, favoritism, and confusion. Consequences exist, but they are not predictable. Some people are punished harshly for minor actions, while others face no repercussions for far worse behavior. This inconsistency is not accidental. It is a mechanism of control. This works because humans rely on cause and effect to feel safe. When actions reliably lead to outcomes, people can make informed choices. When consequences become selective, that sense of safety collapses. Instead of asking, "What's the right thing to do?" people start asking, "Will I be punished?" The focus shifts from ethics to survival. Emotionally, this tactic exploits anxiety and dependency. People begin scanning the environment for signals about who is protected and who is expendable. Favor becomes currency. Compliance feels safer than integrity. Those spared consequences may feel loyal or indebted, while those punished may feel isolated and powerless. The system divides people without ever stating a rule. The power lies in unpredictability. Because enforcement appears arbitrary, resistance becomes risky. Anyone could be next. This keeps people quiet, cautious, and self-policing. Even when injustice is obvious, speaking up feels dangerous because the rules offer no protection. This tactic often hides behind authority and procedure. The same policy is cited for both punishment and exemption, making unfairness hard to challenge. Victims may blame themselves, assuming they misstepped, rather than recognizing the pattern. Awareness is critical because selective consequences are not about correction, they are about leverage. When accountability depends on who you are rather than what you did, consequences stop being guidance and start being control. Pretending alignment to gather intel. Pretending alignment to gather intel is a manipulation tactic where someone signals agreement, shared values, or common goals not to collaborate, but to observe. The alignment is performative. It exists to lower defenses, invite disclosure, and create a false sense of safety that encourages others to speak freely. This works because agreement feels like protection. When people believe someone is on their side, they relax. Vigilance drops. The need to filter thoughts fades. Shared language and affirming nods tell the brain, "This person understands me." And that perception opens the door to honesty. Information flows most easily where resistance feels unnecessary. Emotionally, this tactic exploits the human desire to belong. People reveal more when they feel mirrored, validated, and accepted. Expressing alignment creates emotional warmth that feels reciprocal, even when it isn't. The target begins to volunteer opinions, concerns, strategies, and weaknesses without realizing they are being collected rather than shared. The manipulation deepens because the listener feels no threat. There is no conflict, no challenge, no pushback. That absence feels like trust. Meanwhile, the person pretending alignment asks subtle questions, listens carefully, and stores details for later use, whether for leverage, positioning, or control. When the alignment eventually dissolves, confusion follows. The target may feel betrayed, but struggle to explain why. Nothing overtly hostile occurred. The damage came from misplaced trust, not open opposition.